Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. My best friend the Wendigo. Sometimes things happen to us that we just cannot explain. No matter how many resources are available or what information we can find, there are things that can never be understood, and that is a commanding factor of life. Now, a question. I know some, if not many of you have had friends, even best friends that disappear from your life without a rhyme or reason. That very same thing happened to me with my friend Marcus. We were best friends throughout high school and carried the friendship on well into our 20s, but one day he simply disappeared. I don't mean he was reported missing and the police were involved. I just mean he left without telling me, his best friend. I spoke to his mother, and she said he had gone on a trip to northern Alaska. When I asked her why, she said, he never gave me a reason. I could hear the sorrowful tone in her voice. Like myself, she missed him too. But out of nowhere he came back. He told no one he had returned, and one day he showed up on my doorstep as if he had never left. I admit he looked good, better than I remembered. He seemed healthy, if you can understand. Marcus, you're back? I remarked, bewildered. Yeah, man, he said in his smooth demeanor. He had his hands tucked into the pockets of the jean jacket he was wearing. Got back a couple days ago. You look well. Where you been, man? I asked casually. I noticed his face was flushed red, but it was probably just the lighting outside because the sun was setting. Yeah, thanks. I've just been traveling, finding myself, he answered, but he seemed indifferent about conversation. It made me wonder why he came here if he wasn't looking to talk. Well, that's cool. Did you want to come in? I asked while gesturing my hand through the door. He nodded and brushed past me into my home. Thanks, Derek, he said nonchalantly, as if this was a routine occurrence. Something up? I asked as I closed the door behind me. Marcus flipped his wavy blonde hair and sighed. No, not really. I just have a proposition for you. It was strange that this was how he decided to start the first conversation between us in a long time. A proposition? Forgive me for saying this, but we haven't spoken in quite some time, man, and I don't know if I'm really in the position to dive headfirst into something new. No, it's not like that, began Marcus. He didn't appear slighted by my response, which was welcoming to see. I was just wondering if you'd be interested in coming with me on a trip. A vacation of sorts. It wouldn't be long, just a week up north. With who, you? I asked with a hint of scrutiny. Yeah, just me, he said quickly. For some reason, his fingers were twitching like he could barely control himself from having a breakdown of some kind. Why so sudden? And why me? I mean, Marcus, where have you actually been this whole time? I find it strange you would come to me of all people for this hurried request of yours. I need someone to come with me. It's important that you understand, Derek. I'm not the same person I was when I left. I am something much more unique. But I cannot be left to the masses. I must be quelled. He was speaking in completely vague sentences, the context of which I couldn't understand. I have to be honest with you, Marcus. I don't know what the fuck you're saying to me right now. I wasn't going to lie, but I saw a slight shift in his eyes upon hearing my candor. He sat down in my recliner and clasped his hands together. Listen, are you in or not? He wouldn't even look me in the face when he asked. He simply hung his head with his eyes on the floor. Well, I don't know. Where would we be going exactly? A cabin up north. Once we get there, I'll give you a list of instructions that you must adhere to. I promise you will understand. I took a deep breath. Clearly, Marcus was in distress and needed help. I wasn't going to leave him to fend off against whatever demons were riding his shoulders. I figured he had become an addict and wanted someone to look after him while he got himself cleaned up. I suppose. I said quietly. Awesome. Thanks, Derek. He said hastily. You won't have to pay for anything. I've got that all covered. Just be ready tomorrow morning and we will head up there. Tomorrow? Damn, that's definitely short notice. I said, already thinking about what I would tell my boss. Don't worry about work, man. Just trust me, even if you've never trusted anyone. He remarked as if he read my mind. He then stood up and began walking to the door. I don't know what happened to you, but something's definitely different. I mentioned as I opened the door for him. You don't know the half of it. He said before walking outside. See you in the morning. Bring anything you're comfortable with bringing, but don't overpack. I nodded even though he was facing away from me, and he walked off down the sidewalk. How had he got here? Obviously, he didn't drive if he was walking. Something seriously weird was going on with him. My boss was fine with me taking some time off. I figured it wouldn't actually last a week anyway, so in my head all would be well. The next morning I was ready to go and Marcus arrived just after 9 a.m. to pick me up. I brought my things outside. I had only packed some snacks, a flashlight, blankets, a pillow, my medication, and several outfits for the outdoors alive. The cabin has beds and blankets, said Marcus from the driver's seat of the old SUV he arrived in. Yeah, well, I prefer to feel a sense of comfort that I can only achieve by having things that belong to me. If you say so, he remarked. His lack of engagement was already growing stale. I got in the passenger seat, and we sped away without another word shared between us. Every so often, I would glance at Marcus to study him. While he did seem healthy, there was something innately different about him that I couldn't put my finger on. He was jittery, easily startled, and on edge. We drove for a good 6 hours before pulling off at a rest area. Marcus seemed alert, but for some reason he said, "We're going to sleep here for the night." The night? Have you gone blind, dude? It's barely 3 in the afternoon. Yes, I know. I'm hungry and I need to rest, said Marcus quietly. I can drive, man, if that's the issue. I asked reassuringly. He turned to look at me with viciously bloodshot eyes, as if he had been staring at the sun the entire drive. No, you don't know the way. You can tell me the way. I have GPS?
No, Derek.
Just close your eyes, or do something for a bit.
I'm hungry.
The way he said hungry was like a ravenous animal. Like his desire to feed was overthrowing his decision-making.
Fine.
Go get something to eat then, I said, kicking my feet up on the dash and leaning the seat back. Marcus stammered when he responded, No, not yet. When night falls, I will. You're acting really strange, man. Is everything good? Instead of responding, he only nodded slowly. I didn't say anything back, but I did watch him from the corner of my eye for some time. I noticed he was watching every single person who walked into the rest stop like a starving fiend. I passed the time by reading on my phone, listening to music through my headphones, and after night fell, I closed my eyes. Up until I decided to try and sleep, Marcus hadn't taken his eyes off the entrance of the rest stop. I can't even recall if I saw him blink once. Luckily, I managed to fall asleep relatively quickly. However, I was awoken abruptly when Marcus heaved his body back into the driver's seat as if he were running from something. He was absolutely covered in blood. His mouth and most of his face, his hands, his shirt and pants, everywhere. Marcus, what the fuck, man? I asked intensely. He swallowed audibly. I feel better now. We can keep going. I could see his teeth stained red from the dim light produced by the rest area. No way, man. You're going to tell me what happened to you. Without looking at me, he said, I had to eat, Derek. We all have to eat. What in the fuck are you talking about, Marcus? What did you eat? A barrel of blood. Not quite. He then started the vehicle and shifted it into reverse. I reached out and shifted it back into park. When I did, he turned towards me and grabbed my wrist. His grip was insurmountably strong. It felt like he could crush my arm if he had the mind to do it. Derek, let go, was all he said while his entire body was visibly trembling. I didn't know what else to do, so I listened. I carefully brought my hand back to my lap, and he shifted into reverse once more before bringing us back onto the freeway. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, but he wouldn't look at me anymore. Not until we reached the cabin. The overwhelming smell of blood had filled the vehicle and I had gagged a few times from it. The pungent aroma wafting off Marcus was almost unbearable. I checked my phone. Of course there was no signal out here, and I caught a glimpse of him watching me from the other side of the SUV. Calling the police is futile, said Marcus through his blood-stained teeth. Tell me what you did back there. I shouted at him, unsure of what else to say. I did what I had to, he said while walking towards the front door of the cabin. Marcus, please man. I can help. Just tell me what's going on. He froze as if he really was about to answer me, but instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Then, he unlocked the door and went in without saying another word. I stood outside for a long time. I didn't want to go inside and see him sitting there painted with blood, but something told me that Marcus needed help, so I went in. He was sitting on a dusty couch, in fresh clothes. He must have showered too because his skin was clear of the red tinge that had dominated it before. One thing was different, though. He had lost most of his hair. I don't mean little clumps or bald spots. I mean there were only a few strands of hair remaining. Furthermore, he had patches of raw skin on his face, and I'm sure they were on his body as well. I sat in a chair across from him and observed his seemingly deteriorating form. His eyes were fixed on the rickety floorboards beneath us, and he had his palms placed flat on his thighs. After 5 solid minutes without so much as a twitch, he finally raised his head. His eyes met mine, but his were almost black. There were dark blue veins forming a webbed pattern from the corners of his eye sockets, and his lips were dry and cracked. When he spoke, it was with a breathy and raspy tone. I'm going to tell you a story, Derek. When I am finished, you will do something for me. You cannot say no, you must do it. I can't make Promi dash. You must. Marcus suddenly shouted. He had raised himself up further, but something wasn't right. His spine was longer somehow, like it had been stretched, making him appear much taller even when sitting down. Okay, I said timidly. His shouting struck a drastically fearful chord within me. Good. He mumbled under his breath. Then he began his story. As you know, I went to Alaska. It wasn't for nothing. I had actually met a girl up there on an app. He grinned slightly, but it quickly faded. When I say this, I mean it. She was perfect. Well, for me at least. He stopped for a moment and I noticed he was eyeing my hands. But then he continued, anyway, her name was Claire, and we really hit it off. It was one of those love at first sight moments. Seriously, Derek, she was everything I could have ever wanted or needed in a woman. I uttered a sound of acknowledgement, so he knew I was listening as he went on. She was a simple person and she lived in an old town. I can't even remember the name of it now, but we made a life for ourselves there. However, she started acting strange. She would ask to have guests over constantly as if I wasn't enough. I don't say that in a jealous way. I mean she literally wanted someone else over every single day, and she reeked of desperation. It was like her life depended on it. While he spoke, one of his fingernails fell off and landed with a quiet ticking sound on the floor. Marcus didn't seem to mind because he kept talking. Eventually, I caved. I invited one of her friends over, a local guy who worked at the town's bakery. About an hour before he arrived, Claire called me into the bedroom. She had this weird, almost evil tone in her voice, but I disregarded it. I thought that she may have been looking to get intimate before this friend of hers arrived, but that wasn't the case at all. "Are you sick, Marcus?" I asked as I watched 2 more fingernails slide off his fingers onto the floor. He didn't answer me, not directly anyway. He looked up at me, and his left eye clouded over with a milky white color. Was he dying right before me? Marcus picked at one of the scaly gray patches of skin on his hand. It only made his other nails fall off, but he didn't seem to mind or notice because he went on. As I entered our bedroom, the door closed behind me. Claire was standing there with a rope and a gag. That only solidified my assumption about her need for intimacy, so I let her tie me up. But instead of getting frisky, she gagged me and left the room. I tried to get her attention, but obviously she couldn't hear me. "How long were you like that?" I asked gently. I wanted him to feel like I had genuine interest. "Longer than I expected." I heard her friend come inside, and I tried to yell to get his attention, but it was no use. That's when the screams started. There were horrendous noises of agony coming from the other room, and they weren't from Claire. He sighed again faintly. During the conversation, his entire body had begun turning a pale gray color, and the last bits of hair he had left fell to the floor. There was this squelching sound and another sound I can only liken to a saw cutting meat. I hated every moment being tied to that bed in our barely lit room. "Where are you going with all of this, Marcus? Are you saying Claire killed her friend?" "She didn't just kill him, Derek. She ate him." "What?" I exclaimed vehemently as my stomach turned. "Yeah, she ate him, and when she was full, she brought the scraps of what was left into the bedroom. She removed the gag and told me if I didn't eat, she would consume my flesh as well." Did you do it?" I asked with curiosity. He looked down and then up before slowly nodding. "I did." "Marcus."
Man.
"I don't know what to say. Just keep listening," he said solemnly. I had to hold my mouth open while she let the blood of her friend drip inside. She told me that if I did, then I'd never be sick again. I'd never worry about anything but eating. It made me remember all the times she had gone out for the night only to come back looking more youthful than before. I shifted in the chair and Marcus stared at my hands again for far too long. I was growing uncomfortable by his lustful gaze. The next time he spoke, his voice had diminished into something gravelly and hoarse. "I did not fight her. I did what she asked. I hoped that she had just lost her mind, and when she was satisfied, I'd make my escape. But I was wrong. The flesh, that is, the consumption of it made me a new being. It gave me strength, vitality, and an iron constitution. I felt the best I had ever felt in years, but then came the hunger." "Hunger?" I questioned calmly, although I was reminded of when he mentioned how hungry he was at the rest area. "Yes, Derek. The hunger for human flesh was insatiable. It didn't matter how much I ate. My body would feel like it had been further deprived of sustenance. I craved warm, running blood, almost like a vampire, and Claire did too. Before we knew it, we had slaughtered the entire town and nobody saw it coming. But after that, Claire, she turned into something feral, something less human and more animalistic. Like you are now?" I asked with a hint of concern. "Yes, she became this creature. It was grotesque and malformed. She wasn't my Claire anymore. So, I did what any loving partner would do. I put her out of her misery. You killed her? I ended her suffering. I see. That's when I came back down here. I couldn't live up there alone, but I also realized I couldn't be left alive at all. Derek, I desperately want to be with Claire again. Whether there's still a place for my soul in heaven, or if I'll be sentenced to an eternal hell for the things I've done. As long as Claire's there, I'll be happy. What are you saying exactly, Marcus? I want you to kill me. You what? I admit, I chuckled a little because the notion was ridiculous. I want you to take the shotgun out of the gun safe and blow my fucking head off so I can't devour another innocent person. Marcus was being serious. I could tell by his tone, and the longer this conversation went on, the more his body changed. I finally managed to ask the question I desperately wanted to know the answer to. Did you eat someone at the rest area? I ate an entire family, he said without remorse. I didn't know what to say. What could you say? All I could do was gasp while remaining at a loss for words. I called the police from the pay phone afterwards, so they should be there now. He began harshly. I chose that particular rest area because the cameras don't work. I had staked it out before even coming to you. It was all planned, but I did it for you. For me. You ate an entire family for me? No. I mean, I made it so you couldn't be connected to what happened. The police are none the wiser, and in reality, you've done nothing wrong. This is fucked up, Marcus. I know.
I'm sorry, Derek.
I need you to honor my request now, though, before it's too late. What happens if I don't? I asked out of curiosity. Marcus stood up hulkingly tall and groaned a bellowing, low, rumbling roar. You cannot deny my desire for death. In my pain, like I ended the pain for Claire. His breathing was rapid and fierce, but he managed to calm himself down. I apologize for scaring you, he said in his gruff voice. Marcus, you were my best friend once. I can't kill you. You have to. This is why I came to you, because you still are my best friend, and I didn't want to ask a random stranger. They wouldn't understand, but you can understand. His face grew long, and it was accompanied by many painful grunts by Marcus. I need you to do this for me. I do not want to hurt anyone else. Even now the hunger calls to me. It is taking every ounce of strength I have left to resist lashing out at you and devouring every tasty morsel of flesh covering your ripe and ravishingly delicious body. He shook his head like a madman before his eyes met mine once again. Please, Derek, I am begging you. I don't know what changed in me, but hearing my once best friend pleading for his death no longer perturbed my emotions. I stared at his rapidly transforming body for an indeterminate amount of time before getting up and walking to the gun safe. It was already unlocked. He must have done that while I waited outside. I reached in and grabbed the only gun in the case, the shotgun Marcus had mentioned. I assumed it was already loaded. If Marcus had planned this much, then surely he planned that too. I walked back to the chair and sat down, and a gnarled, black-toothed grin spread on Marcus's veiny, gray face. Thank you, Derek. I can't live with myself any longer, and this is the best option. Do not take pity on me. Do not feel guilty or ashamed. Take pride in the fact that you have expelled a ruthless creature from this world. I pumped the shotgun and aimed it at his head. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweating. Oh, one more thing, he remarked. In the glove box of the SUV are my life savings. Take it all and do with it what you will. I ask that you never tell my mother about this, or anyone else. It will be our secret. He then took one last deep breath. Okay, I'm ready. Do it. Just as I was pulling the trigger, Marcus's body twisted and contorted into a far more disturbing visage, and as the shot rang throughout the cabin, his blood and viscera splattered against the couch, the floors, the walls, and even the ceiling. His painful shrieking stopped, and his body ceased all movements. It was over. I sat there with the shotgun in my lap, still aimed at Marcus's corpse for most of the day. I couldn't bring myself to get up or do anything else but stare at my headless former best friend. Eventually, I found the will to stand. After I was on my wobbly 2 feet, I took a sheet from one of the bedrooms and draped it over Marcus. I searched the entire grounds of the cabin for a shovel because I wanted to bury him, but I couldn't find one. It was cold outside anyway, and I'm sure he wouldn't want me to die from digging his grave. I did, however, find some matches. It was the middle of winter, so I thought it would be better to just burn the cabin down. I didn't want Marcus's body to rot there on the cold couch, and as I dropped a lit match on it, the fabric immediately engulfed into a mighty blaze. I walked out of the cabin and got into the driver's seat of the SUV. And that's when I remembered Marcus had the keys. I couldn't help but laugh about the irony of it all. Marcus had left 10 grand in the glove box for me. I ended up having to hike down the driveway and up the road until someone stopped to pick me up. They drove me to the nearest town, Grand Marais, I think it was called. It was a small town, but the people were friendly. I rented a room at their local inn and have been here for 3 days just thinking about Marcus and what he went through. I thought about if I was responsible for the family he murdered and ate, but I had no idea what was going on at the time. I was only along for the ride until I had to play my part, my role in ending Marcus's painful life. If your best friend, or even friend returns to you after having been gone and without contact for years, be careful if they ask for you to take a trip with them. And always remember, the mysteries of the world can outweigh grounded reality. Nothing is as it seems, even Marcus. Be safe, everyone. I hope none of you look down on me. Second story. The Feral Forest. I have seen the ice sheets in the Antarctic and the sand dunes in the Sahara. I saw the curve of the world as I floated in zero gravity, and I felt the crushing weight of the sea 400 feet beneath the waves as I explored unknown wrecks. 3 ex-wives, 8 recognized children, and none of them deserve the fortune I have accumulated. And yet eagerly they wait, because they've heard the rumors. I hear the whispers in the halls beneath my office. Murmurs of cancer, the bad kind, the type of cancer that you don't survive. It's true. Non-small cell lung cancer is the biggest killer in the USA, and I just found out that I've got it. When I was 20 years old, my father got me working for him in our family grocery shop, Walker & Sons. He was ecstatic. The shop was started by my grandfather and bared the family name, and my father was ready to hand me the lead. In a single day, I saw a demand that we could barely supply, and as I flipped the door sign to closed, I asked my father why he'd never bothered to expand. "This shop isn't about the money," he'd stated, hunched over a dustpan and brush. "Pop built this store with his own hands so that he could support and raise a family. Money can buy you a lot of things, but it won't buy you happiness, it won't buy you love, and it can't buy you good heart." He stood up and arched his back, clearly in pain. 7 years later, when the 25th Walker & Sons supermarket opened, I was on my yacht with a group of entrepreneurs and philanthropists that had become my friends. I had proved my father wrong for the first time. When I was in my mid-30s, supermarkets were just a small drop in an ocean of investments, startups, and ventures. I was one of the super rich, the top 1% of the top 1%. By that time, I could promise you that there was at least one item in any room, almost anywhere in the USA, that my companies had some part of manufacturing, designing, or constructing. That's when I met Hannah and found a love with a price that would prove my father wrong a second time. I nearly lost myself back then. Hannah spent her time looking after my first two children while I got high on whatever I could get my hands on. Meanwhile, the money kept us together. She was happy as long as she had a credit card without a limit. Thousands were spent on designer shoes and clothes. Tens of thousands were spent on nannies. Eventually, even the money couldn't replace what she really needed: a loving husband. She cost me millions of dollars in settlements, and I can guarantee you she isn't seeing another cent from me. I won't bother going into my other ex-wives or children. Let's just say that it was a mistake to marry and a mistake to breed. I never could keep my eye away from a pretty young thing. It was in the haze of my 30s that, unbeknownst to me, I would give myself this incredible opportunity. I didn't really care at the time. To me, I remember seeing it as a chance to play God, and that's something I was never going to turn down. At this point in my life, it was rare for me to have a day of sobriety, and when I did get past the hangover, I wasn't of much use to anyone. The letter had been sat on my desk for a couple of weeks before I got around to opening it. It had managed to stay at the top of the pile because the man that had delivered it to me had been stubborn enough to insist it was to be hand-delivered by him. He waited outside for nearly 5 hours. When he was finally sent up to see me, he simply handed me the letter and left. The contents described a project unlike anything I'd ever heard of. It asked for a hefty amount of money just to begin, and then an annual sum to cover the costs of staffing and research and development. I couldn't give it to them fast enough. I secured myself a line with the head of operations, Mark Young, and told him I was always on the other line. Mark purchased a vast amount of lush forest land, in an area I won't disclose, under his own name with an account funded by me. He erected a wall around the perimeter and hired 24-hour surveillance. Not a single spot in or around the forest was unseen at any time. With that, and a tree canopy thick enough to avoid any potential satellites snooping on us, we were safe. A building large enough to be a small town was constructed. It had a food mall, a hairdresser, a small hospital, staff living quarters, and everything the workers would need in their new home, for however long their contract was for. Mark's plan could never have come to fruition without me, so I owned him. Between ourselves, we called it the forest. In public, we didn't talk about it at all. No one did. The staff were looked after as long as they didn't ask any questions. We tried our best to keep the sections separate, and in general, everyone was happy to keep their knowledge to themselves. Our first step was to buy the orphans. We purchased 25 healthy baby boys and girls from different orphanages of different ethnicities and countries. We raised them without language, without education, without love. Once they could walk, they were taken from the nursery and placed into the nest. The nest was designed to introduce the subjects to the world. It was a simple 3-walled room with a ceiling to keep them dry, and a small outside area enclosed by a simple chain-link fence to keep away any animals. There was nothing in the nest except for grass and mud. We didn't clothe the subjects or give them beds. Mark wanted to know what a real human was like. Each morning and night, a siren would wail. From a hatch in one of the walls, we would drop cooked meats. As the children grew older, they began to fight for the food. Scratching, pushing, and pulling at hair. Nothing was against the rules when food was involved. Once they were 5, male subject 6 wandered up to the fence and put his face against the wire. His body was already marked with scars and bruised from that day's fighting. Without much hesitation, he clambered up the wire frame and dropped down the other side. From that moment, the subjects were free to roam the forest. As puberty set in, the forest became a difficult place for the girls and consequently, the boys. Under the circumstances, it was difficult to say if consensuality was something we could ever consider. These were humans, But they did not have a language beyond grunts and shouts. They did not have law that permitted or denied certain acts. Everything was natural. This was the first time we saw something that divided the pack. Suddenly, the boys were no longer happy in each other's company. With sex came ownership, and with ownership came an unwillingness to share. The biggest of the boys were also the first to hit puberty. Male subjects 1 and 12 each took control of a large proportion of the girls. Left over was the majority of the boys and a couple of immature girls, who unfortunately suffered for the next few months until they were allowed into one of the tribes. Food became a battle between the men. 3 male subjects were killed in as many months. Another simply died from starvation. However, when male subject 7 reached the brink of hunger, he warily approached the tribe of male subject 1. On his knees, the nearly man crawled up towards the clan resting beneath a large tree. Subject 1 was alert, watching with wide eyes as he approached. As the boy got even closer, Subject 1 stood and marched over. The girls were getting restless. The boy stopped moving and shielded his face with his hands, peering through the cracks in his fingers. In a moment where the choice was violence or sympathy, this was the first time a subject had shown sympathy. Subject 1 nuzzled the boy away with his foot, pushing him from the group. 7 was too weak to even crawl away, and fell to his side. He died the following day. It was during this time, when the feral children were nearly 15, that I decided to enter the forest. Mark had argued with me furiously right up until I'd told him I'd pull the plug on the funding to his project if he didn't let me in. He let me join the group with a scowl and insisted I was as accurate in mimicking their condition as possible. In his words, they should have no reason to believe I hadn't been living there for my entire life. And so, Mark Young watched as his 40-something billionaire investor took to the forest stark naked and eager to begin. I sauntered up to 12's tribe with my hands swinging by my sides. The boy shot up to me, screaming and hollering in my face, trying to push me away from the girls. I'd seen him do this to the other boys, and usually it worked. I tackled him to the ground and punched until he was spitting blood and barely moving. Dominance was key. The tribe became mine, and I took 7 girls from the boy I left wheezing on the grass. He stumbled away from us, back toward the other boys that had been confined to their own company in more recent times. My girls were beautiful. They were young, fit, athletic, and the sex was incredible. It was so primal and instinctive. I've honestly never had such insatiable urges, not even the drugs compared to it. Quite frankly, I'd never been happier. Over the course of a few weeks, I gave them names that suited their faces. I learned each of their quirks. I stood my ground against any of the boys that tried to take my throne. I got in fights to win my tribe our food, and I never spoke a word. I was only planning on spending a couple of days in the forest, but I stayed for 4 months. Once I finally left the forest, I never really managed to fit back into the real world. My mind kept drifting back to my girls. My third wife was nothing compared to them. My kids were screw-ups. My businesses all but ran themselves, and the world outside of the confines of that forest was lackluster and meaningless. When Mark gave me the call nearly 5 months later, I felt a happiness I hadn't felt since I was in the forest. 3 of my girls were showing signs of pregnancy. 3. I gave my wife whatever she needed in order to have her sign for a divorce and flew to the forest. I watched them on the cameras. They were beautiful, flawless, even. 12 had reclaimed the group, and I felt rage building inside me as I saw him laying with my girls. I nearly threw up when I saw him sleeping with them, 2 heads nestled into his neck. It should have been me. It should always have been me. I stormed back into the forest with fire in my eyes. The boy was alerted to my presence by the frightened noises the girls made as they scampered behind the trees for cover. I would never hurt them. 12 was a bit bigger than when we last met, but not by much. Not by enough. I think I broke one of his arms because he ran off into the forest whimpering with it held to his chest. I took no time asserting my dominance with the girls. It was good to be back. The world was perfect again. 2 of the children survived. Once the first was born, Mark and I agreed that more food was needed to be dropped to feed the increasing population. The other tribe also had 2 babies, and it was important for us all that our girls were getting enough to live. Male Subject 1 and I had come to an amicable, unspoken agreement that we would each take half of the food that was dropped. The other boys scavenged what we left behind. Every 6 months I had a checkup with the doctor in the building attached to the nest, and after a few years I stopped talking altogether. My companies continued to profit, my children did not care for me, or I for them, and I truly needed nothing more in the world. Today I had my biannual checkup with the doctor. I've been living in the forest continuously for 17 years. The sounds of the city drive me crazy. All of the engines and horns and shouting and bright lights all through the day combine with the foul air and make my head spin. The screen on this computer is hurting my eyes, and it takes me forever to find the right key. Mark is still watching me every day. He says he might join me next year, when he retires. The doctor flew in a specialist who confirmed the cancer in my lung and was told not to ask any questions. What's funny is that, even now, I have the chance to prove my father wrong for a third and final time. My father said money can't buy a good heart, but it can buy a good lung from a willing donor. The truth is, my sons have begun to best me in the forest. I do not have much time left with my girls before a new king heads the pride. If I do get a transplant, I must either go back to the real world, or live out my days shunned from my own tribe, which I cannot bear to do. I'm sorry, Mark, but it looks like you'll be going in alone. I have seen the ice sheets in the Antarctic and the sand dunes in the Sahara. I saw the curve of the world as I floated in zero gravity, and I felt the crushing weight of the sea 400 feet beneath the waves as I explored unknown wrecks. 3 ex-wives, 8 recognized children, and none of them deserve the fortune I have accumulated. But 13 girls, 15 children, and 9 grandchildren, along with an entire forest of people, true people, deserve every cent I have ever earned and ever will earn. When I die, all of my savings and subsequent earnings will go directly to the forest, to provide space to expand and grow. Thanks for the ride. Third story. Don't go into the forest after sundown. My husband and I live in a house that's somewhat secluded. Our neighbors aren't the type you can just say hi to over the fence, and a large, thick forest backs our property. For the past year that we have lived here, I have gone on a run along the forest path almost every morning. My husband likes to sleep in, whereas I've always enjoyed my early rises. Last week, we went to a friend's birthday party and were out late. I ended up sleeping in and missing my morning run. I had a few chores to do, and by the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I decided I wasn't going to miss my run that day. I stepped out onto the back porch and took a deep breath as the sun was beginning to set on the horizon. My husband stepped out and gave me a lazy smile before he kissed me on the cheek. I told him I'd be back before it was dark and headed off. It started off like any other run. I take the same path each day. It's a little overgrown but still obvious enough and easy to follow. I was only about 10 minutes in and I started to notice something. It was quiet, eerily quiet. Normally I can hear birds, leaves in the breeze, and bugs chirping. But it was just complete silence apart from my own breathing and heart beating in my chest. I found it creepy, but shrugged it off as something to do with the timing of the day. The next strange thing happened only a few minutes later. There's a part of the path that wraps around this massive gum tree, the type that you can't see around when you stand in front of it. Well, I reached that part of the path and it was gone. Completely gone. Not like someone chopped it down and there was a stump or a hole in the ground left. It was like the tree never existed in the first place. There was grass and fallen leaves in its place. It looked like any other part of the forest floor, untouched for years. I was starting to get a bit freaked out. I run this path every day. I know this tree is meant to be here. I remember the first time I saw it. I was in awe at the size. I made my husband come for a walk with me the next day so I could show him too, and he was also impressed by the sheer scale of it. It didn't make any sense that it had quite literally vanished. Even if someone was going to chop it down, I wondered if it was even possible to do it in such a short amount of time. I only just saw it the day before on my usual morning run. The practical, logistic part of my mind came to the conclusion it must have been chopped down. I decided I would wait to talk to my husband about it when I got back and maybe even bring him with me to have a look the next day. Maybe he would have an obvious answer that I was missing. Perhaps I could contact the council and ask them about it. I shook it off and continued along the path. As I continued running, I started to get this off feeling in my stomach. Something just didn't feel right, but I didn't know what it was. After a while, I noticed that the sun was setting. Fast. I was losing light quickly, which didn't make any sense. I only left at 5 p.m. The sun wasn't due to set until almost 7, and I had only been gone about 20 minutes. I looked at my watch and sure enough, 5:23 p.m. I checked my phone and it said the same. Just to be sure, I opened up the weather app and checked the sunset, 6:46 p.m. I was standing in almost darkness staring at my phone in total confusion. I had no idea what was going on and it was scaring the crap out of me. I knew the trees would make it dimmer than out in the open, but this was different. I decided enough was enough, and I was just going to cut my run short and head home. I turned around and began running back the way I came. After about another 10 minutes of running, I was stopped in my tracks and I felt my heart almost stop. There, standing on the path staring directly at me was a moose. Those things are insanely huge. But the weirdest part about it all was I live in Australia. We have just about every deadly animal on the planet, but we sure as hell don't have moose wandering around, and I certainly had never seen one in the last year I had been coming through the forest. I stared at this creature for what felt like an eternity, my heartbeat pounding in my head as my mind raced. It just stood there, eyes glowing in the dark, staring into my soul. I was frozen in fear, unsure of what I should do. Then, after I felt like I was going to throw up from fear, it finally broke eye contact and just walked away. I stared as it strolled out of sight as if nothing had happened. Once I could no longer hear the footsteps, and I was back in complete silence, I began sprinting. I was way too terrified to be in this forest a second longer than I had to be. I ran and ran until my lungs felt like they were going to give out. I thought for sure I should be reaching the clearing soon, but the more I ran, the more it felt like I went deeper and deeper into the woods. I glanced at my watch and my breath hitched. 9:42 p.m. It's not possible, I said to myself. It can't have been 4 hours. My whole interaction with the moose, although felt like forever, in reality only lasted a few minutes. I pulled out my phone, and again it matched what my watch said. I tried to call my husband, but I couldn't get any service. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was pitch black now, and I had to use my phone torch to illuminate the path. My mind was racing with some kind of way to come up with how this could be happening, but I had nothing. I decided all I could do was keep following the path and hope that soon enough I would come out and be home. I was exhausted from running for so long, so I walked for a while, constantly checking my phone to see if I got any reception to try and call somebody. I knew that I should have been out of the forest by now. I was trying my best to stay calm, but I was panicking internally. Suddenly I froze with fear when I heard a deafening, guttural scream in the distance. I had never felt so sick in the stomach. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I was about to pass out. It was unlike anything I had ever heard. It didn't sound human, but I couldn't think of any kind of animal that makes that noise either. I turned the flash off my phone. For some reason, standing in complete darkness felt safer to me at that moment. I didn't dare move as I intently listened for any more noise. Not a sound, not even a cricket or a breeze. The scream came from behind, and so I decided all I could do was keep moving and hopefully get further away. I'd heard online that mountain lions make terrifying screaming noises, but again, to the best of my knowledge, there are none in Australia, and certainly not in my area. Either way, I was not interested in finding out, so I picked up my pace as I continued down the never-ending path. Then, I heard it again. Only this time it was much louder, meaning only one thing. It was getting closer. I broke into a full sprint, the adrenaline burst giving me the extra energy I didn't know I had. I ran for as long as I physically could before I had to slow down to catch my breath. I glanced at my watch again, 1:05 a.m. I let out a short laugh in disbelief. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples as I took a few deep breaths. I was too afraid to stay still, so I began walking again. The forest felt never-ending. There was no sign of a clearing or anything that looked familiar. No matter how much I moved, I just seemed to go deeper and deeper into the thick woods. I no longer even had a path. I was stepping over branches and bushes, trying my best not to trip. I was watching the ground for so long, I forgot to look ahead of me, and when I did, that was when I saw him. Or rather, standing just a few meters from me. I could make out the figure of a pale person with their back facing me. I should have been thrilled to see another person, but for some reason their presence irked me, and right before I was about to blurt out something, I stopped myself. It was hard to make out many details in the dark. My eyes had somewhat adjusted, but from what I could see, he was just standing there, facing the other way, seemingly doing nothing. He looked bald, and I struggled to make out any clothes on his body. As I was studying him, that's when it happened. His head slowly turned until it was facing me. My breathing stopped when I saw its face. Instead of human eyes, it had two large black circles that looked like mini abysses. It had no nose and a mouth that matched its empty eyes. When I didn't think it could get more terrifying, the creature slowly began to stand, and I realized it was actually squatting initially. I watched in frozen terror as the creature's long, skinny legs came into view, right as it dropped its freakishly long, skinny arms at the same time. It must have been more than 10 feet tall. Once the creature had fully stood up, it turned towards me. I was too scared to move, to think, to breathe. All I could do was watch. It stared at me for a moment before dropping its jaw to let out the most unearthly, thunderous roar you could imagine. This was enough to snap me out of my frozen state of terror. I turned on my heel and sprinted in the opposite direction of the creature. My chest was burning as I ran as fast as I could. I refused to look behind me, but I could hear the thumping legs following behind me. I had no sense of direction, no plan. All I could do was run. I still couldn't see that well, and so I hadn't seen the edge until it was too late, rolling and toppling down a steep hill until I landed in the thick brush at the bottom. I groaned in pain, winded from the fall. I blinked a few times before looking up at the ledge I had just fallen from, where the creature suddenly appeared. My eyes widened and my heart raced as it looked around. I thought for sure this was it. There's no chance I can outrun this thing in my state. Just as I was reflecting on all the things in life I had missed out on, the creature turned away and walked back into the trees, out of sight. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding on to. The bushes must have swallowed me up enough so that it didn't see me. I checked my watch again. 4:59 a.m. After laying there for a few minutes to catch my breath, I slowly sat up, wiping the tears from my eyes as I could finally think for a moment. When I felt ready enough, I rose to my feet and looked around. I then noticed the path, a very familiar path. It was the one I ran every day. I began following it, hoping and praying with every step that my ordeal would finally be over. After a while, the forest started getting thinner, trees more spaced out, until finally I could see a clearing with light. I audibly gasped as I quickened my pace into a full sprint towards the opening, and when I came out on the other side, I could see the sunrise. Tears filled my eyes as I saw my house in the distance, and I continued running until I got to the back door. I burst into the house and saw my husband sitting in the living room with a mug in his hand. He turned and gave me a puzzled look when he saw me. "You all right?" he asked. I stared at him in disbelief. Why was he not more concerned? Why hadn't he been out looking for me? "Are you joking? I've been gone all night. I got lost and so many crazy things happened. The time went all weird and dash." "All night? What are you talking about? You were gone for like 20 minutes. He responded, totally bewildered by my shouting. "But the sun is rising. I just saw it when I was coming back," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "No, that's the sunset." He rose and came over to me, concern on his face. He pulled out his phone and pointed at the lock screen. "Look, 5:24 p.m. You were gone for less than half an hour." Fourth story, an encounter with a Wendigo. At 1 minute to midnight, I took out the shot glass and put it beside the bottle of Jägermeister. I don't drink anymore after what happened to Pop. The one exception is the first day of September. The house is dark except for the warm glow of the 3 bulbs above the dining room table. I rub my tongue against the inside of my cheek. My mouth always goes dry. The only sound is the incessant ticking of the wall-mounted clock. At midnight, the soft bell sounds, a miniature version of church bells. I fill the glass and hold it aloft for a second and swallow with a deep breath. The subtle burn wins its way into my throat and stomach. I wash the shot glass by the light of the moon shining through the kitchen window. Loretta wouldn't mind my drinking, but a used shot glass beside the sink raises questions. And I never like to talk about it. All these years later, I still have nightmares. What I saw up on that mountain left a greater impression than any other event in my life. More than my children being born and my father drinking himself into an early grave. Loretta tells me I should talk about it, that it would help. She might be right. She always is. So here goes. I joined the park ranger service right out of school, and it was a perfect fit. I took to academics like a fish to the desert, and the outdoors always called. I passed my time in school daydreaming of the weekend and hiking or fly fishing with Pop. In the summer of '89, I was stationed in the Appalachians. Our jurisdiction encompassed trails leading all the way up the mountain. Up there, the spruce thin out and clouds hang heavy even in fine weather at the base. I spent the summer clearing fallen branches from the walking trails after a couple of vicious storms over the winter. It was hack work reserved for the junior, but the truth of it was I didn't mind. The peak of the summer heat was spent and visitor numbers dropped as the weather began to turn. Persistent drizzle had kept me desk-bound for the morning, and we were about to get lunch when he burst through the door. He let out a moan and collapsed to the floor. Stanley leaned down and propped him in a seated position. Water dripped from his shoulder-length hair. His limbs hung limp by his side. I handed Stanley a cup of water. Stanley used his index finger to push down his chin. When the water hit his tongue, the man tensed and his eyelids flicked open. He flailed his limbs and knocked the glass from Stanley's hand. The glass shattered on the floor, but the man paid it no mind. "It is out there," he said. "What is?" The man half turned and gripped Stanley's shirt and made balls with his fists. He repeated himself, pausing after each word. "It is out there." He started to sob. He released his grip on Stanley and buried his face in his hands. We lifted him onto a chair, and he pressed his face against the table and bawled. I grabbed the rucksack he had dropped to the floor. On the bottom right was a name tag behind a plastic sleeve. Lenny Porter from San Diego. There was a number at the bottom. "I'll make the call," Stanley said. When Stanley returned, Lenny was sat up staring blankly at the wall with red eyes. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in a week. Stanley closed the door. "I spoke to your father." Lenny didn't acknowledge the words. He sat motionless and unblinking. Stanley shuffled across to where I was sitting and pressed his palms on the table. "Lenny left San Diego 2 weeks ago with a couple of friends. They planned to spend a month hiking the trail north. The father gave me 2 names, Freddie and Sabrina." When he heard their names, Lenny leaned over and picked up his backpack. He rummaged frantically until he pulled out a stack of Polaroids. He flicked through the photographs and then slapped one on the table. Stanley and I leaned over. Flanking a fitter and healthier Lenny were what must have been Freddie, tall and wearing a baseball cap, and Sabrina, shorter and wearing a bright yellow top with an almost fluorescent blue belt pulling the fabric tight around her waist. Lenny fingered the photo, and tears welled in his eyes. "What happened to them?" He sobbed and shook his head. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Stanley took a map down from the wall and pushed it in front of Lenny. "We are here. Where did you last see them?" Lenny blinked away tears and concentrated. He squinted at the map and pressed his index finger down and tapped it. Stanley took a pencil from his breast pocket and marked the map with a cross. "I'll notify the police. Get the truck ready to go." During training, they told us about search and rescue operations. The Rangers are the first responders. It was part of the job. Twisted ankles and wandering off the trail and getting lost are not uncommon, and no reason to get the police involved. But this felt different. I secured the gear in the truck and Stanley appeared, flanked by a police officer in his early 30s. "Harry is hitching a ride. His partner will take care of Lenny." We drove up the trail for about 15 minutes with the truck until it grew too narrow and treacherous. We split up the gear between us and set out on foot. Our destination was high up the mountain and far away from the trails. It was almost as if the trails deliberately avoided the area. We hacked our way through the thick forest. How had they ended up all the way out here? Stanley checked his watch constantly as we climbed. He wanted to get there before dark. I figured we would be lucky if we did. Stanley and Harry talked like old friends, asking about each other's wives and children. The park rangers are in effect an extension of law enforcement. It made sense to be friendly with the police, and living in a small mountain town made it almost inevitable. I like that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Stanley checked the map. "Almost there. Get your torches." "All right." Harry reached into his backpack and pulled out a flashlight. I did the same. "Do you know what's up this way?" Stanley said. I shook my head. "Somewhere up here is an old cabin. Hunters used it as a base back when you could still hunt up this way. The cross our friend Lenny put on the map is just about on top of it. Let's see if we can get there before there's no light left." We didn't make it by dark. Twilight gave to night with little warning. Soon we were relying on the light from our torches. Being on a trail in the sunshine lends a sense of security up here, even when you are alone. Now, surrounded by black and with the trail long behind us, an uneasiness grew in my stomach for the first time. Stanley paused and swept his torch. He muttered something under his breath. Harry took a few steps to the right, lowering his head and squinting. "There it is," he said. At the farthest reaches of Harry's torchlight, the cabin emerged from the woods. Stanley tapped Harry on the shoulder. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." The cabin should have been a source of comfort, but it only added to my unease. The roof was half caved in and trees encroached on all sides, gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. The structure looked like it belonged more to the forest than to man. The only door hung askew on warped and rusted hinges. 2 windows had long ago lost their glass. Stanley shouldered open the door with a grunt. Leaves and branches covered the floor, blown in through the open windows and roof. We dumped the gear inside. Stanley took out a lantern and tied it to a horizontal branch a few paces from the front door. He flicked it on and the light shone bright. If there was anyone lost nearby, they could not fail to see it. We split up and entered the forest, guided by our torches. Stanley instructed us to go no further than the reach of the lantern. It was our lighthouse on the horizon. The wind blew in fresh from the north. I buttoned up my jacket against the cold. The beam from the torch was strong, but aside from the narrow cone of light, the forest was a deep and full dark. Stanley and Harry called out the names of the 2 missing, Freddie and Sabrina. I did the same. Every few steps I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with the scurrying of animals and insects going about their business, and the constant rustling of the wind through the leaves. It was hopeless. This was needle in the haystack stuff. Freddie or Sabrina could be unconscious on the ground a few feet to my left, and I would never see them. We should camp and wait for first light. Harry's voice cut through the night, louder and with urgency. I skipped towards the sound as fast as I dared. The 2 torchlights of Harry and Stanley played close together, the beams of light trained on the forest floor. "You might not want to see this," Stanley said as I came up behind them. It was too late. By the light of the torches I saw him, flat on his back, arms and legs bent at unnatural angles. I almost gagged when I saw his face. The left side caved in, a red, bloody mess fragmented with the white of the skull. The right side was intact, one green eye staring up, wide and unblinking. The remainder of the face had an almost serene expression. It was not the look of fear that you would expect from someone about to have half their face crushed. No skin remained below the neck, the contents of his torso picked so clean I could see his full spine. "What did that?" I stammered. I didn't get an answer. Stanley fished the Polaroid from his pocket and studied it under the torchlight. He handed it to Harry. "It's him. It's Freddie." Harry jumped and swung his torch out into the woods. "I swear I heard someone talking out there," Harry said. "We've been calling out their names too." "No, it wasn't that. It sounded like whispering. It's the wind through the trees." Harry didn't look convinced. He called out the name of Sabrina and listened. Only the sounds of the forest. Stanley shushed him. "There's nothing we can do for the boy now. Let's get back to the cabin and radio down the news." Stanley took a few quick steps towards the cabin and motioned for us to follow. He seemed agitated. I didn't blame him. I followed on his heels. Harry lingered, searching the woods with his torch until he too fell in behind. The inside of the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Out of the wind and removed from the mangled corpse of Freddie, my mind processed the sight. I had gutted my fair share of fish, but this was different. I put my hand to my stomach and swallowed hard. I was overcome with a compulsion to repeat my unanswered question. What could have done that? Before I could, Harry gave us some more bad news. There was no response on the radio, only static. It wasn't surprising. The cabin sat in a depression between the peak we crested on our way in and the taller peak beyond. "We have to go back," I said. Harry shook his head. "Not in the dark, and not when there's someone still out there." "We don't know if that girl is dead or alive," Stanley said. "I heard her." "You heard a whisper is what you said. And if she was there, she would have come to the light. She'll come to the lantern, and we'll wait for her." Harry threw out his arms in protest. Stanley sighed. "If she's dead, then we'll find her in the light of morning. If she's alive and nearby enough to whisper in our ears, then she'll come to us." 2 rectangles of light shone through the open windows from the lantern outside, but the front room of the cabin still had dark, shadowy corners. Stanley took a second lantern and tied it to an old light fixture hanging from the ceiling. The room lit up as if under sunlight, but a cold light that gave the room a bare and unwelcome feel. I busied myself clearing a space on the floor beside the black pot-belly stove at the rear of the room. Stanley and Harry stood as statues, staring up at the wall behind me. I turned. Etched in black soot onto the blank wall was some kind of monster, long-limbed and with an elongated skull. It stared back at us through white blobs left clear of black. I took a step back and almost stumbled. "What is that?" I didn't need an answer. You don't live and work up in the mountains here without hearing the stories. Stories told dismissively by daylight, like you would talk about the monsters you imagined hiding in your closet as a kid. By night and around a campfire, the stories take on a graver tone, and the name of the monster is only ever whispered. Wendigo. Of course, I had never seen one, but if I had to imagine what one might look like, the painting in soot taking up the full height of the wall of the cabin was an exact match. I waited for one of the 2 men behind me to dismiss what we saw drawn on the wall, to make light of it and crack a joke. Neither did. Stanley uttered a simple instruction. "No one goes outside without a weapon." Our shadows danced on the walls. The lantern hanging from the ceiling did not move. Stanley leaned and looked out the window. The lantern hanging from the tree branch swung back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. There was wind tonight, but not enough to do that. Stanley bent down and fished a rifle from the bag. My heart beat like a drum in my ears. And then something else. Whispers. What sounded like the whispers of a girl, entreating us, inviting us out into the darkness of the forest. Stanley inched open the door with the muzzle of his rifle. He stepped through the gap and watched the lantern on the tree come to a rest. He stood beside the lantern and searched the corners of the forest illuminated by the light. Nothing moved. Harry unclipped the leather strap on his belt and drew a pistol and went to the doorway. I felt naked and exposed with my hands empty. I took a step backwards, the Wendigo drawn in soot looming large behind and burning a hole in the back of my head. A shadow flashed through the trees and Stanley swung the muzzle of the rifle and shot, the crack piercing the night. He raised the rifle to his shoulder and flicked it from side to side, searching for movement. The lantern boobed up and down. With a rush, a long-limbed creature dropped onto Stanley from above. He screamed and wrenched the rifle around, but had it knocked from his grip. Harry fired 2 shots, and the creature let out a wail. It bounded towards the door, and Harry slammed it shut. He pointed the pistol to the closed door and emptied the chamber. Harry took a step back and shot me a glance. Through the whole ordeal, I had not moved. I had barely breathed. Was it dead? Was Stanley okay? The window. I screamed. The long, thin fingers of the creature wrapped themselves around the inside of the window frame. Then the head appeared, uncannily human-like, but distorted and disfigured. The chin elongated, and the teeth like razors and drenched in blood. its eyes white and piercing, just like the etching on the wall. Harry grabbed me by the arm and hauled me into the back room of the cabin. He slammed shut the flimsy door. The back room was windowless, and the only light was a thin strip at the base from the lantern in the front room. We crouched together, our shoulders pressed against the door. We listened. The light patter of footsteps, two thin strips of black, interrupted the strip of light at the base of the door. Something stood on the other side. "Come out, it is okay." It sounded like Stanley. Had he killed it? "Come out." Harry straightened and I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't open the door," I whispered. "They say a Wendigo can imitate those it kills." My hand brushed against Harry's back and knocked the flashlight from his jacket pocket. I fumbled in the darkness until I found it, and I flicked it on. I scanned the room for something, anything we could use as a weapon. I walked away from the door and kicked at the twigs and leaves on the floor. All that was good for was kindling. Something smelled rotten. There must be a dead rat somewhere. "It's Stanley," Harry said. I pointed the torch to him. His eyes were wide and wild. "He must have killed it." He smiled at me and took a step back. The door slammed open and carried with it the rotten stench. What stood in the doorway was not Stanley, but the Wendigo. Harry kneeled before it, breathing in the noxious fumes. I shone the torch onto the creature. Its gray skin pulled tight on a gaunt frame. And then something glinted. A belt buckle. Around the creature's waist was the bright blue belt Sabrina wore in the Polaroid. "Sabrina?" I said. It turned to me and paused, tilting its head to the side. I thought I saw a glimmer of recognition, a brief moment where it knew the name. But then it snarled, its mouth opening wide and dripping with saliva. It wrapped two hands around the neck of Harry and leaned in. I acted instinctively, without thinking. I jumped at the creature, swinging the only weapon I had, the torch. I brought it down on its head with all the strength and adrenaline I had. It bucked and sent me flying into the front room beyond. I threw out my hands against the fall and grabbed the lantern Stanley had hung from the ceiling. It could not bear my weight, and the cord pulled out from the ceiling and I fell with a thud. I jumped up at a burst of warmth from my stomach. The lantern had smashed on impact, and the white-hot filament broke free of its casing. I groaned in pain, and the creature lumbered forwards. I retreated into the corner of the room and pulled my knees up to my chest. It stood over me and opened its mouth, razor-sharp teeth gleaming white. Then the smell of smoke. The creature hopped and then scrambled backwards. The leaves and twigs covering the floor ignited under the heat from the lamp filament. A small flame burst up and the creature covered its face. Fire. It didn't like fire. I crawled forwards and swept as much of the kindling as I could grab onto the flames. The fire grew and the creature screamed. As smoke filled the room, it coughed and spluttered. It made one last effort to come at me, and then retreated out of the room and into the forest. I went to the back room and grabbed Harry. We stumbled out of the cabin, the fire now spreading up the walls and to the roof. Stanley lay below the lantern hung from the tree, unmoving and with a chunk of flesh missing from his throat. We ran into the forest in the opposite direction the creature had gone. We first climbed up to the crest and then back down the mountain. We stumbled our way down by the light of the torch. Adrenaline coursed through our veins, and we imagined that thing right behind us, stalking us in the dark. When we finally crossed a trail, we followed it back down to the ranger station. A team of police and National Guard hiked up to the cabin after the sun rose. The cabin had burned to the ground, the potbelly stove the only item that survived the blaze. The bodies of Stanley and Freddie were brought down. They said Stanley's flesh had been picked clean down to the skeleton. That was the first day of September, 1989. Sabrina was listed as a missing person, and her father spent a month in the mountains searching for her. But she's gone in every sense that matters. Turned to a Wendigo by hunger for human flesh. She transformed into something unrecognizable from where it began. Around campfires, people still tell stories of the Wendigo. I don't know if they truly believe they are out there, but I know I have seen it. Sometimes there really is a monster in the closet. There was no consoling her this time, so Holly drove her home, assuring that she will personally keep her up to date with our search. We thought that this was going to be an easy search, so the police weren't involved from the very beginning. Now, the ugly seriousness of this disappearance was beginning to manifest itself. The cops arrived just as Holly was parking her Jeep after driving the mother home. We continued the search through the night through hours and their combined efforts. We found nothing that night, and we found nothing for the next 26 days and nights. All rangers on working neglected their usual duties in favor of this search. We combined our forces with the cops and the numerous volunteers, yet each and every day brought nothing but further disappointment. Each and every day Holly and I would venture deeper and deeper with a search dog, yet we returned empty-handed. Dogs failed to pick up any scent. Aerial searches of the forest revealed nothing. It was like little Chester stopped existing. His mother didn't remain at home, like we advised her. She would wait on the edge of the forest until deep into the night, when we would return to offer her nothing but more disappointment. She even wanted to go look for him herself, but we could not allow her to do so. She was already a mess to begin with, and we had to leave an employee of the reception to be with her so she wouldn't do something to herself. Each time I saw her, my heart hurt more and more, because every time I saw her I could not offer her anything more than disappointment. Holly was acting like she wasn't affected by this at all, but her eyes displayed her immense distress, more than words ever could. It was on the 27th of August that we finally found what was left of Chester. This whole ordeal is the reason I cannot sleep without the lights on and a hefty dose of pills. It is the reason I still wake up screaming night after night, reliving those horrible moments. Holly and I spent that entire day searching, and as the night fell, we unanimously decided that we should not return or rest, but rather make haste. We were deep into the forest, and the trees and their branches were growing denser every step we took. Our search dog, Jester, was already a senior dog awaiting retirement, yet he was one of the keenest canines we had. He had a long track record of finding teenagers that have wandered off path in their drunken stupor, so we were sure that anything that we missed, he would pick up on. It was around 2 a.m. when we came across a clearing with a small mound of earth at the center. I recognized this place from a map I studied, yet I had to admit both to Holly and myself that I had never been here before. We walked towards the mound and leaned on it, taking deep breaths and enjoying this moment of relaxation. Suddenly, Jester rose up and violently sniffed the air around him before breaking out in a frenzy of barks. We rose up and scanned the area around us with our flashlights, yet nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That's when we took a closer look at Jester, who was still going wild. Jester was barking at the mound. We decided to walk around it and see what was the cause of Jester's concern. I unleashed him, and he ran to the other side of the mound. Holly and I walked across it and joined him. He was now deathly silent, unflinchingly focused on one particular spot. Holly and I shined our flashlights to where Jester was pointing. I immediately noticed something peculiar with the spot. Whereas the grass all across the mount was growing and flourishing from the land, here it seemed like it was stuffed. I grabbed a handful of the grass and pulled it back, revealing a hard wooden surface beneath it. Holly and I began hastily removing the grass to remove whatever was secluded by it. Our efforts weren't in vain. It was a dry, heavy log, standing upright and blocking passage. Shining through the patches that the log failed to obscure, we uncovered that there was definitely some kind of a room in there. A foul smell emanated from there. In hindsight, we should have known what it was. Should we go inside? Holly asked, holding one hand over her nose and asking for my approval. I wish I was more of a craven that day. I wish we had called backup. I wish we never came across that damn mound. Yes. Help me pull this damn thing out, I replied, commanding Jester to step back and wait. He obeyed. We grasped the log and pulled it back, revealing an entrance. I will never stop regretting the moment I shone my flashlight inside. On a pile of dry, dirt-stained bones there was a small, frail body. Maggots already found their home inside of him. He had flesh missing from his limbs and face, yet the most terrifying thing was the fact that his ribcage was ripped open by brute force, and still fresh entrails and blood were splattered all across the dirt floor. I could bear the sight no longer, and my arm instinctively rose the flashlight upwards. My sudden movement revealed 3 pairs of bloodied, dirty feet. I could hear Holly's shallow breaths behind me. Almost against my will, I pointed the flashlight up and screamed in horror at the abomination that was revealed to me. Jester's menacing growls filled the screaming silence surrounding us, keeping us captive with these things. There were 3 of them. They were naked and covered in blood all the way from the tips of their long fingernails to their rotting teeth. Their teeth were revealed by their unsettling grins, which almost conveyed pride in their actions. All 3 of them growled in unison. They let out a raspy, disgusting sound that I fear will never leave my ears. Quick as a bolt of lightning, they stood up and lunged towards me. Jester rushed in and grabbed the leg of the closest one, yet he paid him no mind. I drew my gun out, yet I managed to fire only a single well-placed shot in the stomach of the thing Jester attacked before they overwhelmed me and my consciousness failed me. It was Holly that saved my life, as I would later come to know when she and my other colleagues visited me in the hospital. As those things tried to devour me right then and there, Holly emptied a full magazine in them, and then another one, for good measure. Yet she herself was unconsolable due to the fact that she accidentally shot Jester, who leaped into the air to snatch the neck of one of those monsters. So there you have it. That's why I quit being a park ranger. That's why I cry when I see a fucking tree. My heart shattered to a million pieces when I heard that Chester's mother shot herself. But do you know when I cried the hardest? This morning, while drinking coffee and watching the news on TV. I screamed at the TV and threw the remote with all my might, shattering the display when the fucking news anchor reported that a teenage girl was reported missing in the national park. Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. If you have the creepy feeling of being watched after a horror movie, be very careful. Do you like watching supernatural horror movies? The Exorcist, The Conjuring, Paranormal Activity? Do you like reading stories on spooky happenings in the supernatural realm? If your answer is yes, pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you. They like watching you too. Yes, you. You, the person behind the screen who is reading this post now, especially if you watch horror movies inspired by real supernatural happenings. Did you think that they would not notice you? That you would experience intense fear, the very emotion they hunger for, thinking of them, and they would let you go home and sleep, safe and sound?
No.
No way. The moment you started feeling uneasy in the cinema, at home alone on your computer, in your bedroom, They locked onto you as if you were a bleeding human treading water in the middle of a herd of bloodthirsty sharks stranded amidst a deep, dark ocean. Think about it. Why would these intelligent, malevolent beings allow themselves to be used as a form of entertainment for millions of people worldwide, seeking some transient excitement on a quiet night? Because there is a price you pay with your soul. Because they have an appetite for fear and despair, and you will give them exactly what they need to feed on. There are many incidents of spooky supernatural events happening on the set of horror movies, especially the ones that deal with spirits. Some directors run into unfortunate problems that end up in the abandonment of the film project, actors die, or get into accidents. Eerie things happen to the people involved in these movies. Some movies never see the light of day. Those entities clearly refuse to be used as supernatural entertainment. For the entities that do allow their haunts to be depicted, directors are unwittingly selling to them for fame and money, and you are the product. Let me give you an example of when they are present. After the horror movie, you step into the shower and feel the deluge of countless water droplets hitting your skin. In that moment, you close your eyes for a few seconds and think about the chilling scenes you had just experienced. Suddenly, you sense that someone or something is there. A hoarse, breathy whisper strokes your ear. Your flight reflex kicks in. Your eyelids pull wide open, and you glance around the bathroom anxiously. You see no one. Nothing but that ominous, misty shape in your clouded bathroom mirror. It must have been my imagination. You shudder, try to comfort yourself, and continue showering. Little did you realize, something was there, silently hovering behind you, watching your every move, tracing their blood-stained fingernails just above every inch of your bare skin. It could be the little girl you just saw with long, nightmarish black hair covering her mangled face. It could be that woman, with her neck dislocated to face the back, crawling around on all fours, blood dripping from her every limb. It could be your worst fear. They were there, and their gaze never left you, feeding off your fear, stretching their ghastly demonic features into the most evil, grotesque grins.
Top, top, top.
A flood of tactile sensations on your bare skin continues as water droplets rain down from your shower head.
Top.
They sneak in a touch with their cold, rotting fingers. A touch to let you know that they are there. A touch to let you know that just a mere few inches from your eyes, unbeknownst to you, their face is right next to yours. Their murderous hands lingering right next to your neck, visible in the reflection of that small object in the corner, but obscured by the steam and mist. They know they have you in the palm of their cold, dead hands, and you can never escape. You see, it is scientifically proven that everything a person has ever seen/experienced is stored in the subconscious. Every ghost, every abomination, every horror that you've seen. It's all in there, waiting to break out. Their demonic face, that feeling of absolute terror you felt when you first saw them, it's all etched deeply into the deepest recesses of your mind. So next time you have a nightmare about them, or you wake up in the middle of the night in fear with your body paralyzed, sensing a presence of sheer evil pinning you down, or a pale lady in white without a face lying next to you, know that they have come for you. Second story. Our ancestors were right to fear the forest. I read once that in antiquity, people were advised to avoid the forests and wilds. These territories were treacherous and often unexplored or unmarked. Those who would enter would not always return, and so myths began to spread that terrible things lurked within these lands. Most people were content with letting the untamed lands remain so. As time went on, though, most of the world moved on to fearing other things. I, however, have come to fear the woods much like our ancestors did. My family moved to the small wooded town of Sunderland, Vermont when I was 8. My parents wanted someplace quiet and not so crowded, something in contrast to a place like Boston. I didn't particularly want to move, but I hated Boston anyways, so I didn't argue. The place my parents bought was a rustic two-story with a backyard that rested against the western edge of a forest. For the first 7 years I lived in Sunderland, things were normal. The woods and I had a healthy relationship. I'd hang out within viewing range of the house, and I would never go in after dark. That changed when I was a junior in high school. That's when my nightmare began. It was a late summer afternoon, and the sky was a dull gray. My friend Chris and I went into the woods behind my house to smoke a joint he bought off a kid in our calculus class for $30. It was a fatty, but Chris definitely got ripped off. "We don't need to go far. I just don't want my parents to be able to see us," I told Chris. "You've never explored deeper than this?" he asked. "A couple times with my mom and dad, but I've never really been interested otherwise." "Then it's time for you to go on an adventure," he said, "and I've got the perfect solution to your fear of getting lost." Chris stopped and dropped his backpack at his feet. He rummaged around for a moment and pulled out a can of red spray paint. "We can make a ring on the trees we pass so we don't get lost." "Why are you even carrying that around?" I asked. "Never know when you might want to mark your territory." "You're an idiot, dude," I laughed. We continued walking deeper into the forest, Chris marking the way. I let him walk ahead of me as we walked further on ground made soft by years of decay. After a few minutes, he slowed down abruptly before hurrying over to something and saying, "Hey Heather, come take a look at this." "What's up?" I asked as I approached his side. "Check this hole out." Just a few feet in front of Chris was a pit. It was probably 3 to 4 meters in diameter. It looked like someone had used a giant post-hole digger to lift a perfect cylinder out of the forest floor. Rope-like vines hung around the edges, but the walls of the hole were strangely smooth. "How deep do you think it is?" I heard Chris light the joint. "Good enough spot," he mumbled to himself. "No idea. Let's throw some stuff in it." I kicked a rock in and waited to hear it collide with something, but there was only silence. Chris threw in a couple branches as I stood close to the edge, watching them fall into the black. Silence again. "Freaky." Chris exhaled smoke and passed me the joint. "Thanks," I said as I took a deep hit and peered into the pit. It was almost mesmerizing, though the longer I stared, the more nervous I felt. I felt as if something beyond the darkness was staring back at me. I took another hit and passed the joint. "I don't like this hole," I said. "My head hurts looking into it." We continued to hand the joint back and forth as we stared into the pit. "What do you think's down there?" Chris asked. "Probably dirt and lots of bugs." "I hate bugs." Chris kicked a bunch of dirt into the hole. "I dunno, they can be kinda cool, 'cept spiders." "Yeah, fuck spiders. Also, fuck this pit. Let's go home," Chris said as he tossed the still smoking roach into the pit. We watched the light get swallowed by the darkness that filled the hole. "Man, that's deep," I whispered before I turned to follow Chris, who was walking back. As we made our way to my house, I felt like I had seen or done something I wasn't meant to. I revisited the site in my nightmares that evening. In my dream, I was staring up at myself and Chris from within the pit. When Chris tossed the roach into the pit, I watched it fall in slow motion for what seemed like an eternity. When the embered tip finally went out, there was an inhuman cry that carved into my eardrums like a hot awl. My vision cannonballed out of the pit and swerved through the trees in the forest until it stopped just outside my bedroom window, where I saw myself sleeping. I immediately woke up and looked out of my bedroom window, my eyes searching wildly for something new or out of place. But there was nothing there. I sat there hyperventilating for several seconds before I started to calm down. The next day at school, I hurried over to Chris during our shared free period in the back of the library. "Hey man, how's it going?" He didn't respond. "Yo, you good?" I put my hand on his shoulder, and he jolted upright. "Shit, you scared the fuck out of me," he said sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry, I was taking a nap. I didn't get much sleep last night." Did he have the same dream? I thought to myself. I didn't ask. I just wanted it to be a weird nightmare. I sat down across from him at the table and pulled my laptop out. "So, what's good?" I asked. "Not much, but listen to this. After I went home last night, I couldn't stop thinking about the hole. It was weird, right?" Chris answered. "Yeah, very," I replied. "So, I decided to do some Googling about really deep pits and came across this thing called Mel's Hole. Some guy called this paranormal radio show in the 90s and talked about this hole he found that was so deep that even an 80,000-foot fishing line didn't reach the bottom. The thing might be a hoax, but regardless, it got me thinking. How does the hole like the one we found exist?
No idea.
But there's something not right about it. And on a side note, can we stop calling it the hole? It's kind of bothering me referring to it like that. How about Heather's hole? It's in your backyard, after all. Fuck you, that's gross. I laughed. Something else? How about the circle? It was a perfect circle, after all. That's better. So, should we go back and check it out later? Chris asked. Was he not afraid of that thing like I was? I dunno, Chris. The circle makes me really anxious. So what are we supposed to do? Forget about it? Chris said with a hint of frustration. I don't know what I want to do.
But
Chris cut me off. You had a dream too, didn't you? I stared into his eyes. They twitched. Why, yeah. The falling roach and then something coming out of the circle, right? Yeah. I saw it too. I sat in silence for a moment. You want to go back after that? We had the same dream, man. That means something. Nothing's happened. For all we know, we were just scared by it and had really similar dreams. Chris had a point. But what if something does happen? Chris scratched his cheek. We'll go from there.
fine I mattered.
Anyways, did you do the homework for Miss Kennedy's class? After school, I had a lot of homework that day and wasn't feeling very social, so I decided to just stay in for the night. While I was working on a short story for my American storytelling class, I heard my parents get in from work. I continued typing away when I heard footsteps ascending the staircase. They stopped just outside my bedroom door. "What's up?" I shouted. Silence. "Mom." I waited for a response. "Dad." Again. Silence. Chills slid down my spine as I remembered the dream from the night before. I sat frozen to my chair until a heavy knock on the door made me jump in my seat. I stared at the door for what felt like hours, paralyzed by fear. After a few minutes, I heard the front door open again, this time accompanied by the voices of my parents. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm just imagining things, I told myself. I opened my bedroom door so I felt safer, knowing now that my parents were home. With a slight tremble, I resumed writing my short story. Later that night, as I drifted off, the same dream I had had the night before played back to me. Once again, I woke up after seeing myself asleep in my bed, this time shivering and covered in sweat. I jumped out of bed and pulled my blinds shut. I looked at my alarm clock.
3:02 nachts.
Suddenly, I heard slow, methodical footsteps ascending the staircase again. Moving quickly, I shoved the mini-fridge in my room in front of the bedroom door and got back in bed, cowering underneath my covers as I stared at the doorknob. It slowly began to turn. Go away, go away, go away, go away, I pleaded under my breath. There was the sound of something running at the door and then bang.
Bang, bang, bang.
The door shook one last time. Then, silence. I stared at the door until I drifted back into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I was awoken by more heavy banging at my door. I jolted upright. Heather, open this door, shouted my mom. I sighed in relief as I got out of my bed and moved the fridge away from the door. My mom instantly opened it. Why was your door blocked? I debated telling her the truth, but knew she wouldn't believe me. I was moving my furniture around last night and forgot to move the fridge back.
Sorry.
My mom looked at me with exasperation. Okay, but don't leave it front of your door. What if there was a fire? Sorry, Mom. Come downstairs for breakfast. Dad made waffles. When I got to school, I immediately met with Chris. I think something followed us from the circle. What are you talking about? Chris replied. So nothing happened to you last night? No, why? Something tried to get into my room. How do you know? Just trust me, Chris. Fuck. I'm serious about this. Calm down. Just tell me what happened. I told Chris everything I'd experienced the previous night. Christ. Do you think it'll happen again tonight? I don't know. Probably. We have to do something. We don't even know what this thing is or what it wants. What can we do? Maybe there's some kind of offering we can make. I think the fire from the joint woke it up, so there must be something we can do to maybe calm it down? I don't know. That's what they do in horror movies. This is real life, though. Well, do you have a better idea? No, I guess not. We should try throwing some meat and jewelry into the hole after school. That's oddly specific. What else do demons want? Flowers and mixtapes? I replied sarcastically. All right, fine. We'll go with meat and jewelry. I'll bring what I can to your house around 5. Sounds good. That afternoon, I watched as Chris walked up my driveway. You ready? I asked him. Yeah. Are you? You don't look so good. Chris replied. I don't really want to go back there, but I'd rather fix whatever is happening. The two of us followed the marked trees to the circle. You, Chris exclaimed, holding his nose. Smells like rotten eggs. Did it smell like this last time? I asked. I couldn't remember. Definitely not. I peered over the edge and felt an urge to jump. I stepped back. All right, let's throw in our offerings. Chris threw some leftover meat he'd had in his fridge into the hole, and I threw in jewelry I didn't wear anymore. Some gold, some silver. Nothing happened. Is that it? Chris asked. We won't know until tomorrow. I felt a sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had lifted from my shoulders. We went back to my place and played video games until Chris had to go home. I felt uneasy but hopeful as the night came. I hadn't heard anything out of place so far. When I went to bed, I laid there listening to the dark silence, fearing that it would not last. To my surprise, it did. I finally fell asleep and didn't wake up again until morning. The offering must have worked. When I got to school, I approached Chris during our shared period. Hey man, I think we did it. I exclaimed. I don't know about that, Chris replied absently. My gut sank. What do you mean? Once I got home last night, my whole house smelled like rotten eggs. I spent like an hour trying to find the source of the smell, but eventually I couldn't even smell it anymore. So I just went in my room and went on Reddit. As I was falling asleep, I heard glass shatter downstairs. I figured it was probably just my cat knocking over a glass or something, but when I got down there, the glass from the front door was broken all over on the living room floor. I couldn't see anyone outside, but I got this awful feeling that I should not go out there. Where were your parents? Date night. They didn't get back until after all this. Well, what happened next? Well, I didn't go outside. I called my parents and told them that someone threw a rock through the front door, and they said they'd deal with it when they got home. I just went to my room and looked at eye bleach and shy videos to try to calm myself, but I just couldn't shake the dread. Then there were these heavy footsteps running down the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart was fucking racing. They'd reached the end of the hall, then run the opposite direction, until finally something heavy slammed into my door. I was freaking out at this point, especially when I realized I'd left my cell phone downstairs. Why didn't you call the cops when your door shattered? I don't know. I don't always think straight when I'm afraid. All right, sorry, just tell me the rest. Chris sighed. Anyways, I heard footsteps above me in the attic, too. Then something started tapping on my window, but I was too afraid to open the curtains. Eventually, I heard my parents' car coming up the driveway, and all the sounds suddenly stopped. It took me a few minutes to calm myself down, but I told my parents that I thought someone had broken in and might be hiding in the house. They called the cops, who came by and did a search. Did they find anything? No, but they said they'll station a car outside for a couple nights just to make sure no one comes back. Well, what should we do? Chris was silent for a minute. What if it wants something living? No, Chris, I won't do that, I said sternly. Do what? A sacrifice? Are you serious? Well, your fucking jewels and meat didn't do anything. Chris was getting agitated. I understood his fear, but I didn't want to do something violent to appease this thing. Listen, man, I want to stop this as much as you do, but not like this. It doesn't have to be a dog or goat or something. We could just trap a squirrel or rabbit or something and throw it in. I sighed. If you trap them, then fine. Thank you. We'll make this stop. I really hope so, I said. On another note, did you do Ms. Chambers' essay? Oh fuck. That night I dreamt again, but the nightmare had changed. I was dangling in the pit, clutching a vine. I was filled with dread as I peered into the darkness below. I tried to climb out, but the vine broke. As I fell deep into the abyss, windows started appearing in the dirt and stone that surrounded me. I could see my family, Chris, and windows that showed families and children in vintage clothing. The farther I fell, the more disturbing the images through the windows became. My eyes flooded with tears. I started to see people I knew from school silently weeping blood. I saw my parents lying motionless in the backyard. I saw Chris crying in his bed, his teeth stained with blood. My descent slowed until I landed in a bed, my own bed, with my bedroom forming from out of the darkness. There was a steady tapping at my window, and I slowly got out of bed despite my overwhelming anxiety. I felt like I was walking through water as I moved through my room. As I approached the window, I could see the outline of Chris standing in my yard. My window unlocked itself and gently opened, a cool breeze rolling through. Chris, I shouted. He began to laugh, the sound of a crowd of people, not one boy. He sank into the ground as the world around me began to shake. I woke up to find my bed shaking violently. I started screaming, and it suddenly stopped. My heart was racing, and I barely had time to catch my breath before I heard a light tapping on my window. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I did so, the heavier it became until I heard the glass crack. Then silence. I was not about to look out my window. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Chris's number. He picked up almost immediately. Are you okay? What's up? Chris said. More stuff happened. We need to finish this tomorrow. Did the traps catch anything? I said between heavy breaths. I haven't checked yet. What happened? I woke up from a nightmare to my bed shaking and something hitting my window. Were you awake when I called? Yeah, some stuff happened here too. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and all the windows and doors in the entire house were wide open. I tried to wake my parents up, but they're out really cold. What about the cops? Wasn't there one stationed outside? They were asleep too. The cops really are useless. Is everything else okay? I've been hearing footsteps throughout the house. I've just been hiding in my room. I'll go to bed when the sun is up again. I don't blame you. Just be safe. Will you stay on the phone with me? Yeah, sure. I can't sleep anyways. I stayed on the phone with Chris until sunlight poured through my windows. I could hear what sounded like distant whispers outside my window throughout the night, but they disappeared with the dark. The rest of the day went normally, and the two of us met up after school in my backyard. My parents were still at work as I waited outside my house smoking a bowl. After a couple minutes, Chris came around the corner holding two humane traps. One had a large rabbit in it, the other a restless raccoon. My heart sank thinking of what was going to happen to these innocent forest creatures. Are you ready to end this? Chris said to me. More ready than you can imagine. I feel bad about the animals, though. Chris looked at the animals and frowned. I'm not excited either, but it's the only thing that makes sense anymore. Come on, let's get to it. The two of us walked through the forest, following the marked trees to the circle. The land around us was silent. In the cages, the animals were going berserk, biting at the cage and making horrible sounds. I felt both emotional anguish and physical dread. As we approached the circle, Chris turned to me. Does it look bigger than before to you? I looked at it. I wasn't sure, but it definitely seemed larger. Yeah, it kinda does look bigger. All right, do you want to throw them in? Chris asked me, lifting up the cages. I really don't. I'll cry if I do it. Okay, I'll do it. Chris walked over to the edge of the circle and peered inside, taking a deep breath. Okay. I watched as Chris threw the panicking animals into the abyss, the sounds of their whimpers and cries going silent as the circle swallowed them. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. Is that it? Can we go now? Let's hope this works. Yeah, let's go back and smoke a bowl. I need to relax right now. As night fell, we parted ways. The events of the last few days, ever since we had stumbled across the circle, had been weirder and more stressful than anything I had experienced before. I just hoped this would be the end of things. Since it was Friday night, I stayed up really late. I was still anxious to sleep. By 1 a.m., my parents had gone to bed and nothing had happened yet. I was beginning to feel like things had worked. I checked my phone. There were no notifications from Chris. I decided to call him, just to check up on him. All I got was his voicemail. He's just asleep, I thought. I continued to play video games until I heard shouting outside my window. I recognized Chris' voice. I immediately ran to my window and opened it. There he was, standing in the moonlit backyard, still in pajamas and shaking. Dude, what are you doing here? Did something happen? I yelled. We have to go to the circle. Now. Things have gotten worse. Chris huffed. What are you talking about? What happened?
Ugh.
Chris sighed angrily and started walking towards the forest without a flashlight.
Fuck.
I said to myself as I put on a pair of pants and grabbed a flashlight. I also grabbed a knife, just in case. I went downstairs, careful not to wake my parents, and went to the back door. Chris was gone. I was scared, but I wasn't about to let my best friend go to the circle alone. It occurred to me that this might be a trick, an inhuman force appearing as Chris. This was a common twist in horror stories. Even so, I wasn't going to risk leaving Chris alone in the woods without a flashlight. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and started towards the tree-line. There was a stagnant mist hanging in the forest as I followed the marked trees, calling out Chris's name. I gripped the knife tight in my left hand as I carefully made my way through the woods. Eventually I came to the circle, and it was wider than before. It even seemed to be growing before my eyes. There was a loud groan as a tree at the edge lost its grip on the earth and tumbled in, disappearing silently into the abyss. "Heather," I heard Chris say behind me. "Chris," I shouted as I turned around. He was standing with a slouch just a couple feet away from me. "What happened, man? Why are we here?" "I don't know. I don't know, but it's worse now. It's worse, Heather." "Chris, calm down. Talk to me."
No.
Chris shouted. He pushed me and I fell down. I looked behind me. The hole was coming closer. It was hungry. "Chris, what the fuck?" I shouted as I stood up. He grunted and lunged at me. I dodged him and he stumbled, nearly falling into the expanding abyss. "I have to, Heather. It's the only way." He lunged at me again and successfully knocked me against a tree, my head colliding with the bark. I dropped everything in my hands as I hit the tree. He shoved me harder against the bark as I tried to punch and push him away, but he wasn't budging. "I'm sorry, Chris," I shouted as I brought my left leg up between his knees. He instantly keeled over as I grabbed the knife from beside the tree. "Please calm down and tell me what happened," I said, panting. "I don't want to have to defend myself again." Chris moaned in pain and looked up at me before trying to lunge at me again. I sidestepped him and slashed clumsily with the knife. I think it tore his shirt, but everything was happening so fast. I quickly moved away so that I wasn't facing the growing hole behind me and held up the knife. "Chris, please. Stop this." Chris cried out and came at me again. I swung the knife frantically as he approached me, landing one swipe on his torso. He put his hand to his chest, feeling the warm blood seep between his fingers. He looked at me with a look of anger I had never seen before. I was afraid before this, but now I truly feared for my life. "Please, Chris, I'm not playing." I tried to step back, but he lunged at me again. I raised the knife and stabbed at him, aiming for somewhere that wouldn't kill him. He grunted as the blade of my knife sank into his right shoulder. He took a step backward and looked me in my eyes. "Heather." He stumbled back once more and caught his foot on a stone by the edge of the circle. "Chris, no." I sprang forward and tried to grab at him as he fell backwards, but I was too late. I watched in terror as he disappeared into the abyss, screaming as he fell. The ground quaked as the hole stopped growing. I collapsed to the ground and cried there for several minutes, the fear replaced with anguish. "Chris, no." I choked. I had killed my best friend. Even though it was in self-defense, I could not help but blame myself for what had happened. I wanted to wake up, but this wasn't a dream. It was a living nightmare. Too distraught to comprehend what had just occurred, I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled back home through the mist. I woke my parents up as soon as I got home and told them everything. They were skeptical, but my dad agreed to follow me out to the woods after seeing how shaken I really was. The mist was gone, and I lead him along the marked trees until we reached the end. He sighed. "Heather, there's nothing here. It was just a dream." My dad sighed. I stared in absolute disbelief at the solid ground before me. This was where the circle had been. I could see the rock that Chris had tripped on, the disturbed soil where a tree had fallen into nothingness. I propped myself against a tree, overcome with nausea. "Honey, are you okay?" my dad asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. It must have been a dream after all," I said. I didn't believe it. Everything I had just experienced seemed so real. The circle, the knife, the blood, Chris' screams, all seared into my brain. But I didn't want to try to rationalize it right then. We returned home and I went to bed, although I never went to sleep. I kept trying to call Chris throughout the night and the following days, but he never answered. Neither would his parents when I called his house. I knocked on their door, but no one seemed to be home. The following Monday, Chris didn't show up to school. Same with Tuesday and Wednesday. The police searched his house and found both of his parents dead in some sort of bloodbath. The cops theorized that Chris had murdered his parents and ran away to avoid arrest. But I knew the truth. Chris was dead. I was the only one who knew what had really happened to him, but what could I say? People would just think I was crazy, or that I was trying to cover for my friend. The circle was gone. So was my best friend. But the memories would never fade, nor the constant struggle to come to terms with what had happened and why. You can be assured of one thing, though. I haven't spent a day in the woods since. Third story. Every woman has had a creepy experience involving a man. This is mine. I don't think I would be wrong if I said that most women have had some sort of creepy or unsettling encounter with a male at some point in their lives. Throughout my childhood years and now as an adult, I can say that I have had more than my fair share of these occurrences and that they are not ever taken lightly. The most recent one was only a couple weeks ago. I'm a member of a country club, well, my mom's newest boyfriend is, and I basically only use his membership information for the little fitness center that only members have the passcode for. The gym is really tiny, has no AC, and only contains a couple treadmills and elliptical trainers mixed in with a few pieces of weightlifting equipment, all probably manufactured before I was born. Simple, but it was all I needed. It's open 24/7, and you check yourself in before you start your workout. That way, there is no staff required and members like me can come and go as they please. I always work out at night between the hours of 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. This gym is somewhat creepy as there are never any other cars in the club's parking lot due to the time of night. The building itself is semi-hidden because it is at a lower level than the parking lot. You have to climb down a few stairs to get to the platform leading to the door, and there's nothing but dense shrubbery and trees surrounding you as you walk. On this night I arrived and quickly walked down to put the passcode in to unlock the door. I always turned on the outdated television they had in there. The background noise gave me a false sense of security when I had my headphones in both ears. There had been renovations going on recently and they had installed new security cameras inside, along with a new bulletin board with information about current affairs of the country club. My workout went as usual, and I turned off all the lights and turned on my phone's flashlight before leaving the building. There was usually a motion-triggered light that came on when I would exit, only tonight it didn't. I just assumed that it was part of the improvements being made. Besides, I had my phone as a guide. As I began making my way across the platform to the steps, I heard rustling in the bushes to my right. I chalked it up to nighttime critters and kept walking, though I did so with heightened senses. I really like your bra. My eyes widened as I turned around, startled by the raspy voice. A tall, manly silhouette greeted my gaze. My phone's light shone on him as I began to back up, illuminating the man's exposed genitals. What a say, Mater Brie. You don't like what you see? Have you ever had dreams where you're so terrified that you want to scream, but nothing comes out of your mouth except for silence and you're frozen in place? That's how this moment was. How the fuck did he know my name? I was snapped out of my trance by the feeling of a firm grip on my wrist. Instincts quickly kicked in and my body's flight reaction was activated. The only problem was, there was a very strong, very large man holding on to me. Pop. Pain quickly replaced fear, and I began screaming my fucking head off as I felt my shoulder move out of place. He had yanked my arm back so I wouldn't get away. Startled by my surprisingly loud screeching, his grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I started hauling ass to where my car was parked, silently hoping that I wouldn't be abducted, raped, or killed. I finally made it and clumsily got the key in the ignition with my uninjured arm. I looked into the rearview mirror as I peeled away, only to see that there was nothing behind me. Oh my God, what the fuck, he was jerking off watching me exercise. That was all I could think of for the rest of the night. After I had left the country club, I arrived at the emergency room looking like a sack of shit. Dislocated shoulder. 6 to 12 weeks until it would be healed. They fixed me up and I went on my way, dodging their questions left and right and making up some bullshit story about crashing my car. I don't like talking about these types of experiences, and I would rather just forget about them. I live alone in a small, 2-story house. I was not leaving anything up to chance. I made sure all my doors and windows were locked, and I barricaded the front and back entrances. I pulled down all the blinds and kept a knife with me wherever I went. All these precautions and still didn't feel very safe. How the fuck did he know my name? Why the fuck did I go out there so late? Has this happened to anyone else? These thoughts kept racing through my mind as I showered and cleaned myself, twice as good to get the lingering sensation of that man's hand off of my shoulder. The only reason I was able to sleep that night was because I was crying so hard thinking about all the possible outcomes that could have occurred. I was thankful for my life. I finally drifted off to sleep at around 4 a.m. The next morning, I woke up to the sun's rays shining through my window. The events of the previous night were all too clear and I shuddered, just wanting to forget all about it. I was never going to that gym again. I decided to let myself relax and turned on the television, while getting comfy on the couch. And all this brings us to what happened today. See, a couple of weeks passed by like I said. I had almost gotten over the event. This morning I got up and turned on the news while I cleaned up the house a bit. I kind of zoned out and was getting into my cleaning when I heard something that grabbed my attention. The man was arrested today for the abduction, sexual assault, and brutal murdering of several women throughout the outskirts of city closest to me. Police say he would study victims for at least 2 weeks before abducting them. He claims he would find a remote area of the victim's house and live there while he watched their daily lives unfold. More on this story next. I ran over to the TV. They showed a photo of the man's face and my jaw hit the floor. It was the guy who came to fix my air conditioner about a month ago when it had crapped out. He knew where my spare key was. I was already up and practically running towards the crawl space underneath my stairs to look inside. I grabbed the door handle and slowly opened the door, armed with a knife from the kitchen and ready to use it. I was greeted by the sight of nothing. I checked every closet and space I could think of in my home and found absolutely nothing. I'm still sitting here, confused and frightened of the unknown. I don't know if that man was watching me or what made him decide not to come after me again. I'm thankful for my life. Fourth story. Wendigos are coming back now, we can't escape. I'm from a small town, so you might not know about this. I'm living with my parents. Was living with my parents anyway, so I'm interested in cryptozoology. Wendigos, skinwalkers, all that. My friend came to me the other day and told me about this creature he saw with a deer skull outside of his house. His house is 2 houses down. It was a Wendigo. I told him what it was and what it does. He wanted to vomit. I wanted to vomit. We waited for a couple more days. We waited and waited until something happened. A park was near us a couple of miles from us. A couple was killed there, and only their child emerged. It was a child no more than 7 or 8 years old, blonde. You get the picture. We pulled her aside and asked her what happened. She said something that will haunt me to my grave. She said that a deer skull creature had come to the park and told her to play with it. The parents played too. The girl said that they played hide and seek. She hid in a broken tree. I asked her what did she do after that, and she said she was never found, and then she came from the park. She said something horrifying. She said she heard her parents scream, and then she heard tearing, splattering, and screams of agony. Then some staff came over and pulled her aside. Before she could go, I asked her, I said, "How did it not kill you?" She said, "Because it wasn't there." A couple more days, and about 34 children and 26 adults have been murdered, and there have been sightings of over 40 Wendigos eating, chatting. Me and my friends have decided enough is enough. We brought guns, flamethrowers, explosives. My friend, let's name him Ryan, he stockpiled on hundreds of shotgun shells, a Saga 12, AK-47, Glocks, and a homemade bomb. I got another friend, he took a lot of begging, but he agreed. We went to a park that was a hot spot for Wendigos. We found 4 bodies unknown. We went on and found a forest, and we said, okay, this is probably it. We went into the forest. We brought a Dodge Hellcat if we needed to escape. We ran for over a mile and slowed down and set camp. Ryan told me about eyes in the forest following us. My other friend, let's call him Scott, he was seeing dead, mangled animals on the ground. We found our first Wendigo. We went into the forest and found the Wendigo. It moved at unbelievable speeds at well over 100 miles per hour. We let Ryan unleash his Saga 12. The Wendigo let out horrid screams. I quickly pulled out a flamethrower and burned it alive. We sat there for 15 minutes as the Wendigo was cooking and screaming. We picked the body up and took out its heart. We heard more creatures. We knew it was more Wendigos. Before we could look to see what happened, Scott was gone. We found a trail of blood going deep into the woods. We couldn't go after him because there were 2 more of these damn things on us. I shot one over 14 times. It ran back into the forest. I went after the other Wendigo and cut its heart out with the sharpest stick I could find. Me and Ryan waited for over an hour, just sitting praying Scott would come back. Me and Scott went deeper only to find Scott's body. Mangled, he had no eyes, his ribs and insides were showing. We found a walkie-talkie next to his body. We turned it on and something spoke. It had Scott's voice. It said in his voice, "Help guys, it's eating my stomach," it said. We ignored it. We looked over and saw one of those little craps about 300 feet away from us. It was the one I shot God knows how many times. I ran towards it with flamethrower. I lit it up and it was screaming in agony as I was burning it alive for over 20 minutes. I sat down next to Ryan. We both said we need to get Scott's body. Then Scott sat down next to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm back." We aimed our weapons at his chest and we asked him a series of questions. He got all correct. We went home. We had slaughtered 3 Wendigos. We came back 3 days later. We brought our homemade bomb. We went into the forest for over 26 miles. We found 2 Wendigos. One of them killed Ryan, stole him, and nearly slaughtered him in the forest. We then blew up the Wendigo. The 3 of us went and shot the other Wendigo with a Saga 12 in the chest, hitting its heart, killing it. The Wendigos got retaliation and killed 2 people, only a fraction of their losses. Last week it was outside my window. It had the walkie-talkie. We both talked. At first said, "Want to come out to play? It looks nice out today." I snapped back, "No, you just want to kill me." "You are right, I will kill you. You look very appetizing up there." I got my AR-15 and shot it God knows how many times. It ran into the forest, and it said through the walkie-talkie with Sabrina's voice she was my sister, but she had been dead for over 3 years. It said, "All right, I will give you a choice in 1 hour. I will kill someone you love, or I can have your hand." Neither, I snarled back. It then said in Scott's voice, "All right, I will do both." Then I locked my door and slept praying that I won't die tonight. I heard scratching in my door for over 4 hours. I screamed at my door. The Wendigo then said, "If you can eat, why can't I eat also? We need so much food, and right now we need food, and you are my food at the moment." I waited and waited and waited, wanting this thing to get out of my house. Then it ran out of my house. It ran with incredible speed out of my house. It ran so fast that I thought that the house was going to collapse any second. Scott and Ryan went out of state to Ohio. We found more Wendigos. They had followed us to Ohio. They rammed our vehicle with such force it went flying over 600 yards away. We unloaded shots straight onto them and did some numbers, taking out 6 of them. We had to retreat back to our town over 80 miles away. We almost died several times along the way. More killings have been inflicted. 2 couples, 4 children, and 16 adults. 3 days ago, my friend Ryan was found dead. Me and Scott stayed up for several hours discussing this. I was suspicious of Scott because I felt he had this dark force around him. I asked him well over 30 questions. I didn't care. I was going to spot an error. After 3 hours, he got no incorrect. Over 14 hours later, Scott then looked at me. He smiled and he had jagged teeth. He then said, "He tasted like cherries, and one day I'll taste you too." 5th story. Old people are creepy. So I work at a retirement home on the side housing dementia residents. All of the old people are the sweetest little things. One woman in particular is my favorite. Her name is Mrs. Mildred, but all of the staff calls her Grandma because she looks like a little old grandma that bakes cookies and knits sweaters. Anyway, in Grandma's room there is a window that looks outside to a cement wall separating the retirement home from an apartment building. One day, Grandma told me that kids jump off of the significantly high wall. I began closing her blinds when I went into her room. When I started working 3rd shift, we made rounds every few hours to make sure the residents were okay. I went into her room, and she had pulled the blanket up to her chin. She was staring at me with such a strange look on her face that I rushed over to her bed immediately. "Grandma," I said, "what's wrong?" She looked behind me, and that's when I noticed that the look on her face was fear, and she had tears in her eyes. There was a man staring at me, and when he heard you come in, he got on all 4s and crawled under my bed. Will you see if he's still there? White-hot fear crushed my chest because I was standing right next to her bed. Plus, there was no way anyone was in her room. All of the rooms were locked, and the only keys around were the ones that the nursing assistants had. This wasn't the first time Mildred said someone was in her room, but it was the first time she said someone crawled under her bed. Even though I was terrified, I had to check for her, so I stepped back and bent down a little, seeing, to my relief, nothing at all under her bed. I pop my head back up and give her a smile. "Nothing's under there, Grandma. Maybe you were dreaming." "No, he's talking to me right now. I hear him." I tried to comfort her for almost 40 minutes to no prevail. I had been so disturbed by that for weeks that I finally said something to one of the nurses. Her eyes opened wide and her jaw dropped. "What room is she in?" 409. "Why?" "McKenna, please tell me you are making this up." "I'm not." "Why?" I was getting scared again as she lowered her voice to a whisper. "The man that lived there before Mildred would crawl on the floor. We caught him crawling out the window one time. Now, anytime I go into Grandma's room, I make sure someone else is with me." Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of Horror in Detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Possible Wendigo encounter. Hey everyone, not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I'm definitely spooked. Also my very first Reddit post, so sorry if it's a little jumbled. So today my friend, let's call her Ray, and I were in my car at night. Windows rolled down and screaming our heads off to loud music. We were feeling absolutely happy, laughing and having a great time overall while driving around the rich neighborhoods looking at huge mansions. Now, here comes what spooked us majorly. We start getting a little put off because of how dark this road was. Plus, we were going into the middle of a forested area, and everything around us was getting darker and darker. I had to turn on the brights on my car. Now, we still didn't say anything to each other seriously, only joking about being a little nervous and getting weird vibes. I make the mistake of turning down a forked road, and immediately we feel sick to our stomachs, both at the same time. I just looked at her, and we both started saying about how something is not right. It was such an urgent feeling of terror, dread, knowing something terrible was going to happen if we stopped the car. We felt like we had to roll the windows up because we wanted to be safer. Once we finally sped back around and started leaving, I felt an intense feeling of something watching us, and I just could not make myself turn to look to my side into the forest or behind us. The second we got off that road, it felt like a weight came off our shoulders, again at the same time. I've never felt this terrified before, with such a huge pit in my stomach and sense of dread. What was that? Seriously. I have no idea what happened or why we started feeling that way suddenly. I'm so scared even just thinking about it gives me goosebumps all over. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Or do you know what it might have been? Edit. Sorry for my lack of education on what wendigos or other creatures of that sort actually are. I heard from people around me that that's the feeling you get when they are around you, but I might be totally wrong. Something was definitely up though, whatever it was. Second story. The forest where the deer cry blood. I had been a hunter for most of my life leading up to this incident. The smell of the warm air and the beauty of nature always had me at ease. I never felt scared alone at night because I have seen everything there is to be scared of. I have seen bears the size of a small car and animals so vicious they would kill anything that moved. The one thing I was never scared of was deer. I had heard the tales of the skinwalker, the wendigo, and pretty much anything in between. My uncle was an expert in tracking and hunting. We always went on trips together and would always come back with a fresh kill. He had something about him. It was a rule. I remember it so vividly because it was weird. He never wanted to go hunting in winter. I never asked why. I don't know, but something about it always had me on edge. One day it was winter, and I was about to go deer hunting when my uncle stopped at my front door. When he came in, he saw my packed supplies and my rifle and knew I was about to go hunting. He immediately burst into a wrath of anger as he dragged me to a wall and got into my face. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" His spit went all over my face as he looked crazy. He looked primal, as if he was fearful of something that he did not want to share. It's the same face you would expect a child to make if they were dumped in the middle of nowhere. The same face of fear you see in people who have PTSD. I calmly brushed him off and got to the door saying I was going hunting. I was not about to fight with my uncle and ruin this trip, as I hadn't gone hunting for close to a month. When you hunt, you get adjusted to it, and when you go on breaks, you actually miss it. As I got into my truck, my uncle peered at me out the window. He was there to take care of my house, but before I reversed, he left with the door open. My uncle is prone to outbursts. As I should mention, he's only ever done it a few times, and it's always in a situation where the reaction suits it. Not this one, however. What was so bad about hunting in the winter? The spot I had planned was an isolated one. It was a very heavily forested area which I had not been to before. I obviously had mapped the area out and brought essential survival tools in case the worst came. But I never thought I would have to use it after all those years out in the forest. When I arrived, the crisp, cold air immediately saturated me in discomfort. I quickly got another layer of clothes on before I started to walk to where I would set up camp for the night. The clearing I had chosen was a pretty tight one. There was a big tree in the center that stood tall above the rest. It was called the Forest Star, which suited it. Around the clearing, the forest was extremely dense. Almost no sun shone through the top. There was a small hunting tower north of the entrance of the clearing, so it was a direct walk from camp. As I walked ahead, I noticed something. There were small droplets of blood littering the ground. My first thought was that it must have been an injured animal or something like that, but the droplets were small and almost even. I shook the thought out of my head and made it to my setup, and I started to pin my tent. When I was done, I checked my watch. It was around 5:30 p.m. I had around 2 hours for hunting before it was pitch black, and so I made it to the tower. When I undid my rifle from its case, I heard scampering. Shaking it off, I took position and waited. As I stood there, time almost slowed down. I was in a precise focus and was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Out came two small bucks that seemed injured. There were small droplets of blood coming from their eyes. As I focused and I saw that it wasn't dried blood. It was fresh and it was oozing from their eyes. I was shocked. I had never seen anything like it. Multiple scenarios ran through my head. I was thinking, had a hunter shot both of them in the eyes and managed to not kill them? But each scenario seemed more unlikely than the last. I took aim at the closest one and shot it. It stood there for a second, just not moving. Then they trotted off as if nothing had happened. Blood was running from the wound, so I had obviously hit it, but it didn't seem scared nor fazed. I decided that was enough, and sort of jogged to my site. I was freaked out and decided that I'd cook dinner and go to bed early. When I scampered around my pack, I pulled out a tin of beans. I grabbed a pot and started a fire and began cooking them. As I cracked open a beer, the familiar sound of a branch snapping sounded off next to me. I thought it was probably just a small deer, and I brushed it off as I sat and relaxed. I was thinking about the deer, and I started to chalk it up to the fact I must not have hit deep, and the deer were shocked. When I finished eating, I went to bed. I was shivering in the night cold, and I could feel my body shaking uncontrollably. As I dozed off after a brutal 2 hours of cold, I heard another snap. This time, however, it was a lot louder. Like a bear. I immediately grabbed my rifle and went out of my tent. My fire burned low, and in the distance, I saw two red lights. I walked towards it when my mind started to race. Something felt wrong. As I closed the distance, my gut was literally twisted. My mind was anxious, and I felt like I was about to break down. Then I realized what was wrong. Those weren't lights. They were two big, beady, solid red eyes. There were no pupils. They were just orbs hovering. When I realized, I stood frozen. I thought it was a big cat, but what emerged was so much worse. Its fur was black, darker than the night around us. Its antlers grew twisted and uneven. But the worst part? It was crying blood. Deep red droplets were pelting down its unnatural eyes. I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in fear. Then it started to make sounds, the sounds of a baby crying. It was horrible. The sounds of unnatural wails filled the cold air, making it worse. My body felt crumpled, and so I finally broke out into a sprint. When I looked back, it stood there. It wasn't even breathing. But the sounds of that baby crying weren't fading. It was like a speaker was attached to my ear. When I made it back to camp, I rushed to pack my stuff. In a hurry, I ran, leaving the tent behind, and I rushed to my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw that something was walking slowly towards me. That's when the whispering started. Terrible, faint voices echoed throughout the forest as my mind started to close. I felt my cerebral melting as anything I tried to do would not happen. It was like sleep paralysis. As I stood there, I found the strength to finally open the door and get in my car. I slammed the door shut, and that thing was right at the window. I started to sob as I jammed the keys in the ignition. My mind felt fried as I swerved out of there. I didn't care if I hit anything. I just wanted to be away from that thing. Before I could properly back out, it stood up on its legs, and it repeated a voice I recognized. You You do not escape thee. The forests are.
Mine.
It was my grandpa's voice. He died when I was 6 and I never knew any of the details. The thing then made a howl, a terrible shrieking howl that hurt my entire body. As it did so, I heard scampering as more of those things came out. They had blood running from their eyes as well. The baby cries started again, and that's when I finally drove out of that fucking place. When I raced home, I immediately barged into the door. My shoulder ached, but I didn't care. I shoved my door and locked it and ran into my kitchen. That's when I saw my uncle sitting at the table enjoying a small glass of scotch. So, you saw what I did, didn't you, Anthony? I couldn't form words. I was so shocked. My uncle came up to me and said, "What you saw out there is my rule I abide by. There are things in those forests in winter that are so horrible even the most seasoned can't handle it. I saw it when I was a boy, and since then I don't hunt during winter." I finally mustered a sentence. Was it? He took a small sip before sitting me down. "You saw something called Urbarak. It is an ancient being that dwells in the forests during these winters. Hunters who see it usually never are the same again, but some never come home. I was lucky." My uncle sort of sniffled as he told me about his encounter with Urbarak. "When I was 23, my father and I went out into the woods on a very cold winter to hunt. Our family was struggling, so we didn't have much food. When we were hunting, my father called out to me, but before I could even get to him, I heard him yell out before he fell silent. I never saw him again. But what stood there was worse than the loss of my own. A deer with red eyes, black fur, and twisted antlers stood there. Blood was running from its eyes. Then it started to cry like a baby. My uncle broke down and had to take a second before continuing. I comforted him as I was teary-eyed. It ran after me, Anthony, on 2 legs. It was like a human, and I rushed to get away from it. I managed to get myself." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a terrible red scar that ran across the entire underside of his arm. It was trying to feast on me. It knew I feared it. But eventually I managed to lose it. He finally finished his scotch before continuing. "I was stuck in those forests for 3 days fighting to survive. I heard its cries and whispers all around as I tried to make it out. I finally arrived at a road and was taken in by the police. No trace was found of my father except for one thing. They found blood at the scene and tested it. It was my father's. What was strange about it? It was mixed with his tears." My uncle finally stood up. "Fear it, for it knows who you are." Those were his last words. He left my house, and the police found him wrapped up in a noose 2 days later. It broke me. My hunting buddy and best friend was gone. There was one detail about his suicide that was never resolved. He had droplets of blood coming from his eyes. The coroner's inspection said it was an aneurysm, but I'm not so sure that is the truth. I am 50 now, and I haven't been hunting in 2 decades. I can't even go into the forests anymore. I'm thinking about going back and seeing what Urbarak is. Maybe I can kill him. Beware Urbarak, for he lurks in the cold. 3rd story. There's a stranger in my house. There's something off about him. It was the worst blizzard since 1975 here in Wisconsin. They are calling it the storm of the century. The blizzards here are brutal. A few years ago, there was one so bad that traffic came to a dead stop. After being on that frozen highway all night, I try to hunker down when there's a blizzard. Just me and my German Shepherd, Max. We've mostly been watching movies to pass the time. Then suddenly, right in the middle of watching The Godfather, I heard a knock at my door. Max went ballistic. This was an unusual reaction from him. It startled me. My house is pretty secluded off a remote highway, so I don't get many visitors, even in good weather, leaving me to wonder who's out at 10 p.m. in this weather. I grabbed my pistol and tucked it in my waistband before heading to the door. "Who's out there?" I asked. After a brief moment of silence, I got a reply. "Hey there, my name's Carl. My truck slid off the highway a couple miles back. I came out here looking for shelter. Do you mind if I stay here?" I watched Carl through the peephole before responding. I couldn't tell what, but something about him just seemed off. Something wasn't quite right about him. I brushed it off. I figured I'd probably look a little odd after walking a couple miles through a tundra. "All right, get in here, Carl," I said, opening the door for him. The wind outside was howling, making it tough to shut the door behind him. Max really went postal at Carl when he entered. Max was usually a little weary of strangers, but once I'd invite them in, he would settle down. Except that didn't happen this time. I tried to calm him down, but I couldn't. I decided it would be best put him in the bedroom for a while. When I came back out, Carl was taking his snow-covered coat off. "You got real lucky, Carl. There's a lot of less trusting folk around here. Sorry about the dog. He's not usually like that." "Thanks," Carl said, shivering. "Hey, what are you doing out driving around in the second day of this storm? You should have stayed home. Real dangerous to be going out for anything in weather like this." "My power went out. I was trying to make it to my brother's house, but it probably wasn't my best idea." He seemed to be telling the truth, as far as I could tell, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about this guy. Max was still going crazy in the other room. It was starting to concern me. "All right, do you want some coffee to warm you up?" I asked. He nodded his head in response. When I turned around to pour him a cup, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew there was something off with this guy, but I couldn't tell what. "I'm just being paranoid," I tried to reassure myself as I handed him the mug. I hit play on the movie, and it started playing again in the background. As Carl held the warm mug in his hands, I watched him intently. My phone vibrated. It was an emergency alert that read, "Warning, do not let any strangers into your house. Murderer out pretending to seek refuge from storm." I looked back up to Carl. He sat there just looking at his mug. I started to walk to the other room. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I just gotta grab something real quick." I opened the door to the bedroom where Max was and grabbed my shotgun. Max followed me back to the kitchen, barking as we approached Carl. I racked the shotgun, loading a slug into the chamber. "Hands up and turn around slowly," I ordered. He sat there for a moment before moving. He stood up and turned around, looking me in the eye. "What's this all about?" he asked innocently. "It's time for you to leave." "Please no. I'll freeze." "I'm sorry, but you need to leave. Now." It was in that moment Carl smiled. That's when I realized what was off about him. His mouth had too many teeth. Way too many teeth. They were sharp and jagged. Then he charged at me. He was quick. Almost too quick. I just barely had time to pull the trigger before he reached me. The shot knocked him to the floor and left a large hole in his chest, but no blood came out. He looked back up at me and grinned even wider now as he tried to get up. I fired again, leaving a hole in his skull, but it was clear to me that the shotgun wasn't going to stop this guy for long. I ran to the door, slid on my boots, and ran. Max followed close behind. As I hopped on my snowmobile, he hopped onto my sled in the back. We took off. I zipped through the woods. The snow was deep and I was getting pelted in the face by snow and twigs. We didn't make it too far before I hit something and lost control. I flew through the air and into a tree. I woke up to Max trying to drag me by my coat. I struggled to get up. My head was spinning and I was running off sheer adrenaline. I made it to my feet and I could hear twigs snapping in the distance behind me. Max and I took off running through the woods. It was difficult with well over a foot of snow on the ground. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jello, but we pressed on, unsure of how close that thing was. After what felt like hours, we came to a clearing. I could see a light in the distance. It was a house. I felt a sense of relief as we ran towards it. When we got to the house, I pounded on the door. "Please help," I yelled out. After a few long moments, the door opened. Suddenly, there was a gun in my face. Max started growling. "Quiet," I told him, and he settled down. I pleaded with the man in the doorway. "Please help me. I let that thing into my house. I let it into my house. It's not human." The man didn't lower his gun before responding. "I heard about you on the news. Get out of here before I shoot you." "No, please. You don't understand. I let him in my house. He almost got me. Go now and take your friend back there with you." I turned around to see that thing approaching. "No, no, no, no. That's that thing that's killing people. Watch this." I pull my pistol out of my waistband and fire 3 shots into its chest. It keeps approaching, unfazed with a wicked grin on its face. "You see that? That thing's not human. Please help me." I pleaded with him. "All right, get in here. Quick." He replied quickly. I looked out the door as Max entered behind me to see it getting even closer. What do we do? What do we do? Well, shooting it doesn't seem to do much to it. Maybe it's like a Wendigo, and we need to burn it. He starts grabbing various bottles of liquor from a cabinet and starts pouring them on the floor in a circle around his living room. We'll lure the bastard into the circle, and once he's in, we'll light him up like a Christmas tree. Suddenly, the door was ripped from its hinges. We started shooting as it approached with a grotesque smile on its face. The moment it entered the circle, I grabbed a burning log from the fireplace. The creature's smile faded quickly as it grimaced. But it was too late for the creature as I threw the burning log on the ground in front of it, setting it ablaze. It made a horrible, ear-piercing screech as it was engulfed in flames. The flames quickly spread, setting the house ablaze. We ran outside to escape the flames. We both collapsed into the snow, coughing from the smoke. "Sorry about your house," I said to the man. "It's all right. I have insurance," he chuckled back. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of relief that was quickly interrupted by a man who came out of the forest and said, "A house fire in a blizzard now, that's just bad luck. Any chance you two have seen my brother Carl?" He smiled as he approached, revealing a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. Fourth story. The Great Cryptid Hunt. My brother is missing. He has been gone for the better part of 2 years. This wouldn't be unusual for Gary, though. We grew up together, separated by only a few years. He was always the adventurous one, courageous, brave, and intelligent, the worst combination for an older brother. Everybody loved and admired him, and I lived in his shadow. Most people would be resentful, but Gary was a character who raised those around him. I always knew he would end up making a positive difference in the world. When he told me he was going to be away for a few months the summer of my senior year, I wasn't surprised. He had been involved with a statewide operation which led to the seizure of a large amount of narcotics. He was an investigative journalist and had spent months working from the inside to build a case for the local police. The next big case was another year undercover, working to tear down an arms dealer. The group were supplying and fueling gang wars, profiting from the lives of men killed by the weapons he put in their hands. He told me some details over drinks one night over the holidays. He didn't say much until late into the night. He told me how involved he needed to be to get into a position to know the head of the operation. Things he didn't like to reminisce on for too long. It was the same night that he told me about his next assignment. He was working on bringing down a worldwide organization who arranged big game hunting trips for seedy individuals. I met him a couple of months later, and he told me he was leaving the country to meet up with the group. That was the last I heard from him until today. I received an email this morning from an unknown sender. The subject title said, "For the attention of the big fella." I normally would delete these on receipt, but the title caught my attention. Gary had always called me the big fella since I passed him in height at 15. I am about an inch taller than him, and wouldn't be considered the big fella by any means. The email contained a text file and journal detailing his time spent with the group. The text file just said the following: "I don't think I'm going to make it back from this one, big fella. The latter is why I have reached out to you. I fear something terrible has happened. I am trying to track down his location from any clues hidden in these files. Unfortunately, I have to piece together the story from fragmented documents. I'm hoping one of you may be able to help locate him." May 5th, 2022. Last week I received the notification to meet in a small town in North Dakota. It was addressed to Mr. Jonathan Marley, the alias in which I have been communicating under. The letter was stamped with a golden view at the head of the page. There was a list of essentials such as camping equipment, warm clothing, and hunting equipment. Food would be provided on site before departure. There was a highlighted asterisk beside hunting equipment. It said if bringing your own weaponry, rifle and sidearm must be compatible with .308 and 9mm caliber respectively. Weapons will be provided on departure if requirements cannot be met. The request felt strange to me, but I knew this group was very exclusive in admission and presumed it was part of their procedures to remain anonymous. The final part of the note stated the next part of the trip would be confirmed on the day. Our meeting point is situated on the outskirts of a forest. The town seems abandoned other than the people from the Venators, Latin for the hunters. A mix of men and women equipped in military-grade gear, quite heavy-duty for a simple hunting expedition. The main spokesperson for the Venators was a broad man called Crane. He wore a dusty black cowboy hat pulled down to his eyes. His right cheek had 3 prominent scars running towards his top lip. "I'd like to thank you all for joining us on the first great cryptid hunt. This adventure will bring us into contact with the most prestigious prey known to man." I wasn't sure what he meant by cryptid, but the other 10 people who seemed to be joining the party didn't look too confused by this. I'd just like to remind you all that this hunt is partaken at your own risk. I'm presuming you have the necessary precautions in place if something were to go wrong. A slight murmur of agreement from the crowd allowed Crane to continue. "This is your last chance to pull out. Once I name our first intended target, there is no going back. Please return to your vehicle and leave if you have any doubt about your commitment." He eyed the group intensely, waiting for our response. When no one backed away, he smiled. "With that, we are bound to the hunt." He raised a fist in triumph. "Go collect your ammunition from the table to your left. Silver bullets are the only thing that can take down a Wendigo." The group set out as the sun reached its peak. Crane, the only member of the Venators. The others were to hold down base camp and come to our aid if the need arose. They also were arranging transport for the next trip to Ireland. For members of the gang split off to the right. A hushed but frantic discussion barely audible. Marco, the son of an Italian superyacht distributor, was accompanied by his partner Lola and 2 friends, Antonio and Michael, all of whom were reassuring Lola that this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the magical creatures walk among us. I was unsure how anyone would describe a Wendigo as magical from the stories you would hear on the internet. My expectations for this hunt have reduced dramatically. The thoughts of uncovering a huge illegal hunting enterprise have tethered out as I realized we will be hunting a planted elk with a sound box attached. It's hard to comprehend how the Venators have managed to pull the wool over the eyes of so many wealthy and prominent figures. For the sake of my cover, I know I will need to play my role in this trip, but I'm hopeful that I may depart before the next destination. Where is the next leg of the trip, by the way? I called out to Crane, who led the party as we broke through the tree line. Ah, yes, I knew I was forgetting something. He turned to address us. The next target is a mythical siren who calls out to announce the passing of loved ones. A banshee? Joshua questioned in a thick Texan accent. He too adorned a cowboy hat, but his was polished and new. You got it in one, Mr. Williams. Crane clapped his hands enthusiastically. You hear that, Junior? We're heading to Ireland. Joshua clapped his son on the back as the two discussed the terrain they may have to deal with while hunting a banshee. Joshua Jr., or J.J. as he was known, was the spitting image of his father, albeit about half his size. J.J. needed every bit of his belt loop to keep his trousers above his ankles. As night fell, we made our camp in a clearing that Crane had spotted. We'll take turns on duty tomorrow night, if it takes that long. Tonight, I'll let you get some rest. No need to be the hero, Crane. Each one of us is experienced enough to keep a fire going. Crane dismissed the remark with some reassuring words on how he was well rested and would enjoy the tasks. That seemed to settle Joshua, as he felt there was no questioning of his abilities. I took out my notepad to scribble down my thoughts on the day so far. I was running through ideas of how the Venators were concocting this fraudulent trip when Jay approached. Are you working on your checklist? He asked as he sat down beside me. No, just journaling the day. I like to get my thoughts down while they're still fresh. My response didn't seem to register with J.J. Me and Pops have most things checked off already. Lions, elephants, cheetahs, even a grizzly or two. J.J. seemed to be reminiscing as he asked, have you ever encountered anything of this kind before? Not even in the slightest. It was an honest response. I'm aware of how much it cost to get involved with the Venators, and JJ and his father had paid double. I didn't want to be the one to break the news that what we were searching for was no more than a dud. We saw something like this on our farm a couple of years back. Kept terrorizing our cattle, tore some of them to pieces, so it did. He looked over towards his father. Pops didn't know what to do. He shot the son of a bitch damn near 10 times. It just kept coming back. Ended up having to call Mr. Bolton. He gestured to another member of our group who sat alone cleaning his rifle. Caleb Bolton was a dark-skinned man with cat-like eyes. He had his head shaved to the skin. A tree trunk-like neck was in proportion to the rest of his body. Mr. Bolton came late one night and set off into the darkness. The next morning he came back covered in blood and deep gashes. He walked right up to Pa and said, "It's been dealt with," and just walked right off. Pop slipped him an envelope worth more than all the cows on the farm. He went off into the distance, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. I looked over Caleb, wondering what brought a man like him here, only to notice he was staring right back. The night wore on with nothing to report. We settled in and went to sleep as Crane looked out into the forest. I woke up late into the night as a sharp stick I missed nearly punctured my lung as I rolled over. I could see Crane sitting with his back to a tree, face illuminated by the glow of his cigarette. "Can't sleep, Mr. Marley?" Crane asked as he fished another cigarette out of his pack and handed it to me. "You can call me Jonathan," I said as I lit the cigarette. I sat down beside him looking out over the camp. "Will the fire not attract the Wendigo?" I asked, gesturing to the crackling blaze in the center of the sleeping bags. "No need to worry about that, Jonathan." Crane tipped the ashes onto a stone beside him and pointed across the camp into a dense area of trees. "He's been following us since we got here." Crane's words stayed with me as I lay awake. There was a small part of me that was truly scared. The part that was largely present as a child when the darkness held shadows of figures you couldn't comprehend. His demeanor would convince most that we truly were dealing with a creature of the supernatural. I left his side feeling as if we were the ones being hunted. Full of mixed emotions, I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours. My skepticism battling hard against the situation I had found myself in. The forest added to my unease. Branches rustled as a slight breeze blew through the camp. The debate playing out in my mind was silenced by a strangled scream that echoed through the encampment. "Where's Lucas?" Ellie asked as she ripped out of her sleeping bag, grabbing her husband Levi by the shoulders. Levi gathered up his rifle and started towards the location of the uproar, calling out for his son. Caleb and Crane are already ahead of him. I followed after, bringing the handgun I had under my pillow. Caleb and Crane split off in separate directions, directing each other through pointing and gestures. They encircled an area 15 feet from where I stood. Crane surveyed the area thoroughly as Caleb scanned the trees. "Something was here all right, but I don't think it was your son." Crane looked at Levi, his face full of concern. That sense of dread intensified. Marco and Antonio came rushing towards us, the faces slick with sweat. "Lucas is okay. He was just going to the toilet," Marco said, panting. "He came back not long after you left. We weren't sure what to do, so we came to get you," Antonio said, hunching over from the extension. Levi let out a sigh of relief as he made his way over to thank the guys for bringing the good news. I turned to Crane to ask him what he thought could have made the noise, but the color had drained from his face. "We have to get back now, da." Crane pushed past us at full sprint, heading in the direction of camp. "It seems we have been fooled," Caleb said, much more calmly than the situation deserved. We raced through the trees, receiving nicks and cuts as we ran without hesitation. I was pulling away from the main group, just keeping pace with Crane and Caleb, my arms pumping like pistons working to their max. The two in front didn't seem to be putting much effort in their stride, yet they ate up the ground like a marathon runner on his first mile. They were discussing what they might find on our return, but I was too focused on filling my lungs with deep breaths to hear what they were saying. They burst into camp, frightening the 4 remaining members who looked perfectly fine sitting around the fireplace. "Jesus Christ, Crane, you frightened me half to death." Michael was gripping his rifle tightly as the others shrank in behind him. Levi was next to break the clearing, overjoyed to see his family safe and well. Ellie went over to greet him. As she stretched out her arm to take his hand in hers, Lucas let out a cry of panic. Her arm never made it far enough to embrace her husband. The Wendigo burst out from the shadows, grabbing Ellie by the arm and tearing it off, and he flung her down on the moss-covered floor. She bounced with the force, but managed to remain conscious as the beast reared his fangs in her face. The sight of the creature made my blood turn to ice. It was humanoid in some respects, although its limbs were elongated beyond belief. Its ribs protruded its sides, stretching its pale skin to bursting point. Blood ran down its face and chest as it tore a chunk from the arm in which it held. It seemed to stare into my soul as I froze in place, awaiting certain death. Michael aimed at the monstrous figure, but pulled his shot. The bullet struck Ellie in the temple. On reflection, I believe it to be an act of mercy from whatever God looks down upon us. The Wendigo screamed in anger and flung Ellie's body towards us. It crashed into Lucas, knocking him back several feet, his mother's blood covering him in a shower of crimson. My stomach emptied itself of any contents left from dinner. The Wendigo stomped towards us, true evil glistening in the moonlight. Levi managed to pull himself from his daze once he noticed the creature heading towards his son. He looked at his wife's corpse and pure rage boiled over. He tackles the Wendigo with all his might, knocking the beast back into the fire. It tripped over as its right foot caught ablaze. Levi fell on top of it and unloaded the clip of his pistol into the creature's chest. For every bullet he fired, the Wendigo tore off a strip of flesh. His chest was opened first, a mist of red spraying into the night sky. His face was the next to go. Teeth were launched 10 feet in all directions. Levi kept firing through this brutal assault. As the hammer clicked empty, not much remained to identify Levi. His rage-fueled attack cost him his life. The Wendigo pushed the remains of Levi to the side and clambered to its feet. The silver bullets lodged into his chest were bringing this monster closer to its final breath. "Steady now," Crane called out as he raised his sights. "On my mark." Lucas roared as he ran towards the Wendigo. He brandished a blade from its sheath with murderous intentions. I tried to grab him as he raised the blade for the killing blow. I could see what looked like a grin on the face of the Wendigo, through the large, gaping hole of Lucas's chest. The Wendigo had punched through, tearing his heart out in one swift motion. "For fuck's sake," Crane said in disbelief. "Fire!" The forest erupted in a cacophony of gunfire as bits of Wendigo were torn apart. It crumpled to the ground, relishing in the delight to gain one more soul before it fell. Crane dropped his rifle and walked back to his tree where his cigarettes once were. He picked up the tattered box which had been destroyed in the melee. I offered him one of mine as we sat by the tree, soaked in the blood of many. "And then there was 7, he said as he ignited his match on the stricker box. Fifth story. The Wendigo learned to tell time on Thanksgiving. I know what you're thinking. A mythical spirit being able to tell time isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm here to tell you it's necessarily a bad thing. A horrible thing, in fact. Without the ability to tell time, the Wendigo would strike randomly, out of nowhere, maybe going decades or centuries without attacking. But maybe I'm being too naive. Maybe the Wendigo has made me naive, cloaking its murders in various, everyday seeming tragedies. I live out in the country, miles away from the excitement of city life, of neon sin shrouded in innocent novelty. Somehow, though, the chaos of city life found me. My father told me as long as you stay in the house you've lived in all your life, nothing could harm you. Like a fool, I believed him. I followed in my father's footsteps, and it led to my ruin. A kindly neighbor, Joe, moved in next door, although next door is a bit misleading since acres separate humans from each other out here. He was younger, spry, and full of beans. He had a wife, a quiet woman named Jennifer, and one child, barely 5 months old. Despite being at heart a good-natured fellow, he seemed stressed out because the child, Desmond, kept slipping from one illness to the next. One day things seemed especially bad, around Thanksgiving time if I recall. The leaves had all but been sucked off the trees, and it had been raining all day. I didn't have a good feeling about that day. Something seemed off, a little too dismal. I had been thinking bad thoughts ever since the sun woke me up. The objective observer would tell you that this was because my wife expired a few months before, and that I still hadn't come out the other side yet, you know? But I know. The Wendigo, well, let's put it this way. When the Wendigo wants you to know he's coming, he'll give you clues the day before, sometimes the week before. Anyway, I told Joe about the Wendigo, about how if you knew what you were doing, you could make the spirit give your child, or anyone, a more stable flame of life if it was sputtering for some reason. He looked at me like I was crazy or something. I knew I wasn't. Eventually, he caught on, realizing a man with such sure convictions couldn't be wrong. I gave Joe the scroll I used to save my wife from the brink so many years ago. I told him the fine print was something worth reading, that if you performed the ritual in a wrong way, the Wendigo would be as clear-minded about mortal affair as you or me, be able to tell time, insert himself into the flow of our reality without missing a beat. Well, I won't go into too much detail about what happened, or how it happened. Joe performed the ritual wrong, as I knew he most likely would. But I just couldn't let a kid die, you know? I went to Joe's house for Thanksgiving. He knew I was a lonely old man who had just lost his wife. Usually, I wasn't one for a pity invite, but I figured I didn't want to spend the hours ticking off the seconds in my head and waiting for the axe to fall. Better to keep yourself busy. I'll never be able to get that grisly scene out of my head as long as I live. Joe's body was spread out on the coffee table, his face looking miserable and defeated. Jennifer's corpse rested in the fireplace. The lights had been turned off except for a single dim bulb hanging from the kitchen ceiling. Desmond sat at the kitchen table, gnawing on his dad's fingers. He stared at me curiously, like a cat often stares at its master when eating its meal. "Oh, why did you do it, Joe? You gave the scroll to an idiot." A man so addled at the prospect of losing his son, of being outside the pleasant rhythm of society, that he'd do just about anything in order to make sure his son stayed alive, Desmond said. His eyes were bleeding sockets, and it occurred to me that was how my dad said the Wendigo entered a human body, through the eyes, making them explode. "Would you like a finger? Maybe a thigh?" "It is Thanksgiving after all." Desmond gave me a wicked smile. A smile no child of 5 months should be capable of. "Now you just stay right there. Don't come any closer," I said in a firm voice. Joe just had to read the scroll in front of his wall clock. So desperate to save his son he couldn't read the fine print, Desmond went on. Surprisingly, Desmond didn't try to kill me that day. He told me my time was coming, and that I'd know when my curtain would flow across the dusty stage of my life when he wanted me to know. Then he got up, told me not to disturb his great feast because he would be back to devour them in their entirety. So many months have passed since then. The Wendigo devoured his victims, and it was like they never existed at all. Now I'm staring at my own wall clock, thinking every day the axe might fall. The Wendigo can tell time now, and he can confer with the Reaper, know the date and time of my death, and say, "I know this old man should die via electrocution, but let me lend a helping hand." 6th story. I think I may have seen a Wendigo. So this is very confusing, but bear with me. I was in my house with tea and a book. I have a large window seat on the second floor, and I was chilling right there. I have a small 2-story cabin in the woods. A long driveway, about a half-mile, leads down to the main road, not a highway, mind you. I enjoy taking hikes, hunting, fishing, and just enjoying nature in general. I was looking out into the forest to see if I could find any cool birds when I heard a noise. A rustle in the bushes brought my attention toward my neighbor's cattle pen. My neighbor's house can only be accessed by the same long road, and they have a farm with 3 cattle, 2 cows and a bull, 12 chickens, and 2 pigs. A large barn sits in the middle of all the pens. The bush rustled again. Thinking it was a bear, I was worried it would take one of the pigs and drag them into the woods. This has happened once already, sadly. I grabbed my old hunting rifle. I was going to attempt to fire the gun in the air and scare the creature, no reason to harm it. But what I saw made me think twice. I walked out onto my large back porch, fired in the air. The loud noise pierced my eardrums and chased me to flinch. The second the rifle fired, a dull reddish blur appeared, sprinting into the neighbor's pig pen. It got on all fours and grabbed the poor animal with its mouth, then sprinted back into the forest, with the swine clutched between its jaws. Holy shit, I yell, after seeing this. This is where it gets really bad. I sprint to my neighbor's house, gun in hand, waiting to tell him about the grisly abduction I just witnessed. I stopped about 50 feet from the house when I noticed the glass slider door was ajar, and a thick path of blood led from there to the barn. I didn't notice this before, because you can't see either the house or the barn from my house. It's covered in trees. The pig and cattle pens are right near the woods on their backyard, but the tree grove stops, so you can see them. Scared crapless, I tentatively followed the trail. When I reached the inside of the barn, I already knew what I would find. 2 skeletons lie in a haystack. Both were white and picked clean. Yelling bloody murder, I ran back to my house. I locked myself inside with my gun. Pelting rain and hail started coming down. Before the power went out, I watched the news channel, and apparently this storm would go on for 3 days, and it was a big one. Thunder and lightning crashed, and I tried to call the police. News channel blaring in the background. No service. Then the TV cut out. I went to bed and locked every door and window, grabbed my bow as well as my gun and my hunting knife. I finally made it through morning. I'm surprised I slept at all. When I woke up, I noticed something gleaming in the dirt of the pig pen through the pelting rain. A bone-white skeleton, and the other pig was missing. Blood adorned the trees and fence near the pen. I'm typing this on my phone, which is at 20% plus. I have no way to charge it. Does anyone know what this thing is? I need help. I will update tomorrow hopefully, if I conserve phone battery, and I'm not dead by then. 7th story. The Wendigo that didn't leave me alone. I honestly don't know where to start, or if I'm ready to be posting this story of mine, but hopefully it'll help. I know you won't believe me, and honestly I won't even blame you guys. It still doesn't make sense in my own head. I've heard stories about unknown creatures in woods, but never thought I'd encounter one myself, you know? I posted another story about some creepy old people that I had encountered in the woods, but that's nothing. This makes a good horror story for people, but it eats me every day. But here we go. I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd, and let her go unleashed since we like to go to secluded places. Now I have been hiking all over Utah mountains, and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it is a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog-friendly. Now I was scrolling through All Trail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was at the bottom of the list, and it had one review saying good. I thought that was kind of strange. Mostly because people love to review hikes and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike and make it more safe, but I figured it wasn't a popular hike. So the next day Kyrie and I packed up our stuff and went up towards the hike. I always carry first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. It's important to mention now that Kyrie eats a raw diet, meaning she eats raw meat not cooked. And since we were going so early in the morning, I thought I could bring some with us. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear and decided when it was getting warmer we would stop to eat. Where I live, there's a long drive through the canyon and many roads going towards the hike you'd like to go on. This one was a little further than I'm used to, but I didn't care. It was new and I was excited, so was Kyrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now I was following the directions on my phone and saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I haven't heard of this place. It was hidden and far up the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that another car would come down and how I would handle that, but there never was. I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if I could call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars. All in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing towards the road. I thought maybe it was private property, Checked the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Kyrie out, prepared us, and saw the trail. Now, even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Kyrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so, I didn't see anyone. I decided to let her off leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deep in the woods, and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked, but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early in the morning, so I wore a light jacket and decided when it got warmer I'd give Kyrie her breakfast. Now before you start to hate, I know bringing Kyrie's raw meat was absolutely stupid and ignorant of me. I had never seen a bear or wolf or anything, so I got cocky and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson the bad day, so no need to tell me I was dumb. But honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you commented that. Now here is where we begin the bad part of this story. The trail finally stopped being steep and sort of an easy hike from here. When you got to the top, you could see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was absolutely beautiful with the mountains in the background, the sound of the water. This hike was almost the most beautiful one I had ever been to. When Kyrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, she stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Kyrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped, I stopped since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but oh my God. Words cannot explain how bad it stank. It burned my nose and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Kyrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now I've only seen does, but never a male deer in person. But his antlers were huge. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke? When he sees the deer's spirit walking across the water, and how big his antlers were. Almost like that. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Kyrie's food was going bad. I checked that and it seemed fine. When I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Kyrie's hackles went up at that. She started to cry nervously. Now I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It is common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That and also listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now when Kyrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo and I knew that. Now I didn't know what to do. These creatures were only a part of my stories to make me go to bed, not to instructions of what to do. Plus my grandmother was the one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Kyrie again when she cried and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was fucking tall, and it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard in my head, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me, full speed. I screamed, called Kyrie, and started to run. Kyrie was following behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it came in contact with to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on running. I didn't know where to go, I just ran. The trail suddenly got smaller and bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they cut my arms. As I heard it got closer, it suddenly went to the left as I ran straight. I somehow had the balls to look back to see it was gone, but also Kyrie. Kyrie? I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop onto a patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit, but again I couldn't feel it that much and just got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Kyrie. Kyrie! I cried out. I stood up, crying and lost at what to do. I looked back to see a river leading up to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly a heavy weight ran into me, and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Kyrie. Kyrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. Kyrie? I cried out. She was whimpering and breathing heavy. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall and somehow had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I don't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks that I did early. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or I think so. It could also be that there wasn't anything in there. I don't know. I took off Kyrie's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did so, holding and dragging Kyrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak to my knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different than before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon. I don't.
I'm sorry.
But I felt water hit my head hard as I had reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Kyrie and his faces. Kyrie felt limp at this point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me, watching me. The smell was so disgusting. I couldn't help but throw up in my mouth. It reached his arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud. I actually lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this one had let out earlier. I was still holding onto Kyrie, crying and screaming since its arm was close. It looked back to me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, "I am the one of this land." With that, it took steps back watching me and went down the riverbank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Kyrie's backpack. It ripped it apart and pulled out the meat, eating it with the plastic bag that it was in. It suddenly screamed and ran towards that direction of the scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily and carried Kyrie towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Kyrie's neck where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Kyrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened, and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me, and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Kyrie's. Kyrie made it through surgery and had to have some stitches on her, along with a pad. It didn't really heal, and a huge bump grew on there. It had been infected, but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye, but that healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it, but they declared it from a bear, even though they said it looked weird. While I was waiting for Kyrie, I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. Why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur. I have some pictures up of Kyrie. The one with my niece is a hike my mom took her on with my niece. It had been weeks after, and my mom thought to try and help her through it. Kyrie looks nervous in the picture, but you can see the huge bump on the left side of her neck. There's also a picture with Kyrie and her bandages around her neck. And the one that is the most recent of her neck, it's black. The stitches came out. The last picture is of the top of her head, also black, but it's healed now. I'll have pictures of these, but don't know where or how to post these. I haven't been hiking since, and I refuse to let Kyrie go. That time my mom took her, she did it while I was at work, but regretted it because she said Kyrie was crying and was so scared they had to just go home. My mom knows. I screamed at night from nightmares for a week or two. My mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted to my negativity. So yeah, here's my story. I've heard stories where people saw a Wendigo and they didn't get harmed, and God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have some PTSD, but only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it. Kyrie is too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up to the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable, but has things in there that just don't make sense in our heads. So please be safe. I say that with serious sincerity. 8th story. Creepy guy followed me home. Very recently something strange happened to me, and I really don't know what to do about it. Technically nothing is wrong, I guess, except that I am terrified. Any suggestions would be helpful. It started last night when I was at my best friend Amy's house around 11 p.m. I was on her front lawn waiting for her to be ready, so we could walk back to my place a few blocks away for a girls' night in. That was when this guy approached me. He was good-looking, early 30s, had messy black hair and a light stubble. I was already freaked out because why would this guy be coming up to me, a young woman, this late at night alone? I immediately took a step back to be closer to Amy's house. Without hesitation, he stepped onto her lawn and came right over to me. Hi, sorry. I know it's late, but I'm really interested in buying that house over there. He motions across the street where a few houses down there's a for sale sign propped on the grass, and I was wondering if you knew whether or not the owner would be up still? I just looked at him for a moment wondering whether or not to believe him. The entire situation just seemed wrong to me. This is the kind of thing you hear about on the news, and it never ends well. Eventually, I came back to my senses, and in my bravest voice responded. It's 11 p.m. I really don't think they want some stranger knocking on their door right now. Call the realtor in the morning, the number's on the sign. I said, pointing to the big red numbers at the bottom. He just stared at me after that. He stood there long enough for me to seriously contemplate just running and banging on Amy's door. I brushed the thought aside. I was safe. I was only 20 or so feet from my best friend's house with her family I had known since preschool, eating dinner inside. For all I knew, her mom was watching us right now, ready to come to the rescue should it be necessary. Anything else? I half yelled at the man. This seemed to snap him out of it. Sorry, you're right. That makes a lot more sense, he said with a slight grin. Not sure what I was thinking. See you later. He turned and half jogged back toward the house and presumably towards his car. But as he rounded the small bend on Amy's block, I grew nervous. I hadn't seen him get into a car. Was he parked all the way down the block? Just then my friend stepped out of her house and locked the door behind her. As she was shoving her keys into her purse, I ran over to her. You just missed the weirdest thing ever. I am so creeped out right now. I proceeded to tell her everything that had happened as we walked toward my house. What a creep. That is so freaky. I wonder if he's actually a murderer, she said, followed by a mock scary laugh. We joked around about it a little more, finding comparisons between the man and our favorite serial killers. We laughed the whole walk back at the strangeness of the situation, feeling safer in each other's company. It felt good to laugh about it, but for some reason we still kept our voices low, hoping he had really left. By the time we got back to my house, my other friends were already settled in and had started drinking. We were greeted with a, "What the fuck took you so long?" We were starting to think you'd been murdered, from my sister, and "Did you bring more wine?" from a few of the others. In total, this sleepover was comprised of 4 girls in their early 20s. Myself, Amy, my little sister, and my college roommate. To answer my sister's question, Amy and I began telling them the story of what had just occurred. They were all reasonably freaked out. "Do you think he left? I hope he didn't follow you guys." Christy, my college roommate, responded. Amy and I looked at each other, knowing that we both had those same thoughts on the short walk home. I picked up my glass of wine off the table before I replied. "I mean, who knows? He was probably just some weirdo and didn't actually realize how late it was, and then when he figured out how creepy he was being, he just bolted," I said, taking a long sip from my glass. There were a few nods of agreement, but mostly just bewildered looks. I took this time to look over my shoulder and make sure the front door was locked. A few hours and bottles of wine later, we had completely forgotten the incident and were happily watching Mean Girls for the billionth time. It was very late into the night by this point, probably around 2 a.m., when the doorbell rang. My blood instantly went cold and the buzz from the alcohol left me. My friends and I all whipped our heads around to look at the front door. The porch light had a motion sensor, and we could see the bright light just outside, but we also have privacy glass indoors, so all we could make out was the shape of a man, just standing there. From the size and clarity of his dark figure, it appeared that he was right against the door, his arm extended to ring the bell again. Someone found the remote to mute one of Janice Ian's rants, and my sister leaned over the couch to turn the lights off. We felt safer hidden in the dark. He just stood there, though, not moving. He didn't ring the bell again. He just stood there. Should I call the cops? I whispered to my friends, who all stared at me with tears in their eyes. No one responded. We were all terrified, but in the back of my mind, I kept hoping that this was all just some kind of prank, a weird coincidence that had nothing to do with the man from before. I slowly got up and went to the room next to the front door. As quietly as I could, I moved the blinds away from the window and attempted to see who was at the door. I could barely make out his shape when the porch light went out. The sudden plunge into darkness startled me and I jumped, just a little, but it was enough to rustle the blinds, which hit loudly against one another. When I looked back up, it was into the face of the man I had seen earlier. He had this eerie grin plastered on his face as he looked at me through the swinging blinds. He reached his hand up and tapped the window 3 times with his index finger. I'm not sure whether what I did next was brave or stupid, but I reached out and slammed my palm hard against the glass. He had his face only inches away on the other side where I smacked. His smile grew, but I figured I'd scared him off because he turned and ran. Now, I'm not sure if that was the wine thinking for me, but I was very proud that I had scared him off. I was our fearless protector, all 5 feet of me. When I went back into the room with my friends, they were all huddled on the ground, cell phones out, ready to dial whatever number we needed. "Is he gone?" my sister asked. Before I could respond, Amy chimed in, "What does he want? He knows where I live too. I don't know what he wants, probably just to scare us, okay? I'm sure this is nothing." Now, no one really believed me. In our group, I was the one who went in first to the haunted houses, who spent my nights watching Charles Manson documentaries, and obviously spent a lot of time reading scary stories online. Anyway, the cops probably can't do anything about it. He's not trying to break in. He's just being creepy. I'm gonna go make sure he's gone. In my house, the upstairs window is directly above the front door, so you can't see if anyone is at the door from there, but you can see the rest of the street better, so I headed there. Here the blinds were already drawn, so I just peeked out, trying to stay silent and hidden in the dark. Parked across the street, there was this beat-up tan car I had never seen before. I tried to focus on it, but I really wish I hadn't. Inside was the man, in the driver's seat with his arms neatly folded over the open window, staring directly at me. What freaked me out most about this was how content he looked sitting there in the dark. It was such an unsettling image. A man sitting with his body twisted at whatever strange angles allow oneself to sit with their arms like that. He looked like he was getting ready to hear a great story, and I was going to tell it to him. He just sat there staring with a slight smile on his face. I tore my eyes away and ran downstairs to tell my friends what was going on. I sat on the couch with them, and we discussed what we should do next. We decided to wait and see what he would do next. We sat in silence for a few hours, but nothing happened, and we all relaxed a little. At this point, we figured it had to just be a prank. Just after 3 a.m., we started to drift off, and eventually the blankets and sleeping bags were pulled out, the incident nearly forgotten. I was woken up at around 6 a.m., just as the sun was coming up, by Christy, who was shaking me. Hey, he's out there again," she whispered to me. My heart immediately began pumping fast, and I looked around to see that everyone was awake now. I looked toward the front door and saw the shape of a man standing just beyond. I cursed under my breath and tiptoed into the adjacent room as I had done before. This time when I saw him, though, he was facing away from the door. What was he looking at? What could his motivation possibly be now? I decided enough was enough. With another jolt of bravery, I stormed over to the door, intent to rip it open and give this guy a piece of my mind. Stupid, I know. But it was now daylight, and there were 4 of us, each armed with cell phones ready to dial 911 any second. Just as I reached for the doorknob, he stepped away. I saw his shape disappear, and I opened the door in time to see him get into the tan car across the street. I watched him, now more confused than scared, as he closed the car door behind him. With his door shut, he started the car, and 2 other men popped up in the back seat. They just sat up as if they had been there this whole time, pretzeled in his back seat, waiting. The men in the back stared straight ahead. The man in the front said nothing to them, and they said nothing to him. I began to wonder if he even knew they were there. Terrified, I was about to slam the door again when he looked right at me. He began to drive away, but smiled that eerie grin one more time as he waved excitedly at me and shouted, "We'll see you later." 9th story, Your Friendly Neighborhood Wendigo. Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over summer. We were right outside the D.C. area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So, after dinner, we gear up and head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and take out our binocs. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and passes them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer and I train MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All 3 of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say fuck that and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs, or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up and then pass out. My mom wakes me up and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing no matter how tough I am. 10th story. There is something unexplainable in the forests of Oklahoma. The United States is, no doubt, a diverse land of many different forms of life. From the fierce grizzly bears in the mountains of Alaska to the stealthy alligators in the swamps of Florida. Wherever you may be, there is always something unique about your state. That is until you get to Oklahoma. You see, Oklahoma is without a doubt one of the most boring places, maybe ever. Having lived here for 18 years, I'll be the first person to tell you that. Sure, there are large cities, just like any other civilization. However, they are spread out over tens, even hundreds of miles apart. What you are left with in between those cities is what some refer to as the sticks, or the boondocks, or the country, whatever you choose to call it. And that is where I'm from. In the sticks, it consists of four main elements: lots of trees, lots of crops, lots of wildlife, and the occasional Walmart or Dollar General. Since there is not a lot to do out here, that is where most Oklahoma residents take up the pastime of hunting, and that is where my story begins. It was a cold November night, right in the heart of deer season. I was laying in bed enjoying a video game I was playing when there was a knock on my bedroom door. It opened, and my dad walked in. "Hey kid," he said. "Yes, Dad." "You haven't been hunting this season yet. Why don't you take my bow and I'll get you set up, and in the morning you can head out there and go kill us something." Wow, he's really putting me on the spot here. I thought to myself, yeah, sure, why not? I said to him. He told me to dress warm and to meet him outside by the front door in 10 minutes so we could walk out to the spot, so I would know where to go when it was time to leave tomorrow. We began our walk into the woods. With every step we took, I began to get a little bit more annoyed. Where are we going? I thought we were just gonna go behind the house. I didn't know we were gonna have to hike to the hunting spot. Damn, what was I thinking? I should have just said no. When we finally arrived at the hunting spot, we were more than a mile out into the wilderness behind my house. He finally stopped by a huge oak tree and pointed his flashlight at some cedar trees that were off to the side. "Do you see it?" he said.
No.
I replied. He walked closer and shined his flashlight into the trees to reveal a tiny chair that was hidden under some tree branches and sticks. "That is where you're gonna set up in the morning. Got that?" I nodded my head as he tossed out some dried corn to attract the deer in the morning when I came back. "What time do I need to head out here?" I asked my dad, expecting him to say 6 to 7 a.m. He then muttered, You need to be up and ready to head out by 4 a.m. My heart sank. It was going to be pitch black outside. There's no way I was going to be able to make it all the way out here in the pitch black. We finally made it back to the house by 11:30 and I headed up to my room to get as much sleep as possible before this hunting trip. I awoke to the painful sound of my alarm blaring into my dark room. I looked at my phone and it was 3:40 a.m. I sighed and sat up. I put on the warmest clothes I could find and made my way out into the living room. There on the couch sat my dad's bow, 2 arrows, and a small but sharp hunting knife. I grabbed the gear plus a flashlight and made my way out the front door. Navigating the woods at night was an extremely frightening experience that took much longer than what I would have wished. I left my house at 4 a.m. and I did not arrive at the hunting location until 4:37. I was impressed with just how many trees I managed to walk into and how many times I almost tripped over large logs, even with the help of my flashlight. Once I arrived, I sat down in the little uncomfortable plastic chair and began waiting. My dad wanted me out here so early because it makes it a lot easier for the hunter to sneak into his spot and the deer not being able to watch him. I'll never forget the paranoia I experienced in those woods, in the pitch black. The feeling of not wanting to breathe too loud because something or someone might hear you is like no other. After roughly 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet darkness, I heard it. Sticks snapping and leaves crunching. It was a deer walking to my spot. My heart began to pound as I listened closer. The leaves continued to crunch with each footstep, but that's when I picked up on something strange. Is this thing walking on 2 legs? I thought to myself. It sounded just like a pair of human legs walking through the leaves. Is it my dad? I thought. Maybe I forgot something at the house. Surely it has to be him. But no, it couldn't have been him. The footsteps were coming from the woods, not the trail we walked. The footsteps emerged from the woods and stopped. After a short pause, it took 1 step towards me. A moment later, it took 1 more step in my direction. I began to get nervous. Deer shouldn't be acting this way. What the hell is this thing? I raised my flashlight up from my lap, and in a moment of pure bravery and stupidity, I clicked my flashlight on. What I saw in front of me still haunts me to this very day. In front of me stood a creature no shorter than 10 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs. It was covered in black fur. The face was human, I believe. The face looked to be of a man's face. The eyes were closed and the mouth was contorted into a sinister grin. It had 2 great big antlers that seemed to come off of an elk or a moose. It had hooves for feet, and its arms were long and skinny, but had what appeared to be claws on the end of its hands. As soon as I saw this thing, I clicked off my flashlight, praying it didn't see me. Too late. I almost started gagging from fear when I heard this thing sprinting at me. As fast as I could, I loaded an arrow and drew back the bow. Without hesitation, I fired the bow into the darkness, hoping I could hit the creature, but I missed. I heard the arrow whistle off into the woods before striking a tree. Shit. Stupid idea, I thought. I immediately stood up and began sprinting down the trail. The creature was in close pursuit. I ran faster than I knew I could down this trail. When I was almost halfway home, I began to naturally run slower because of fatigue, and that's when it swiped at me. It hit me directly in my right calf. I stumbled and fell off the trail and into a nearby ditch. Once I fell in, I could immediately feel the warm blood begin to start gushing out of my leg. I quickly tore off my hoodie and wrapped it around my leg as a temporary tourniquet. However, my bleeding leg was the least of my worries. The creature jumped down into the ditch with great force and began swiping at the ground, hoping to hit me. Luckily, the thing landed about 20 feet away from me, so I had some time to spare. I hurriedly pulled out my flashlight and threw it behind the creature. Upon hearing the flashlight hit the leaves, it turned around and began swiping at the ground once again. As quickly and quietly as possible, I crawled out of the ditch. On my way out, I heard the creature begin to make a clicking noise from its mouth. Now I can't confirm it, but I assumed that noise was the creature using echolocation to find me. If this thing is blind, how did it see my flashlight back at the hunting spot? I thought. Then I realized I had to click my flashlight on, and the creature probably heard that. Despite now knowing it was using audio to track me, I still ran to the best of my ability out of the woods. The thing didn't follow me out. I made it home and crashed through my front door, bleeding all over the place. My parents took me to the ER to get stitched up. They asked me what happened and I told them what happened, but of course they didn't believe me. They assumed I fell while walking through the woods and tore open my leg somehow. And after a while I began to think the same thing. Maybe I was sleepwalking and fell, maybe I was hallucinating, who knows? Is what I used to tell myself. I almost forgot about my experience until today. My dad went out hunting and was supposed to be back 3 hours ago. Me and my mother began to get worried. I walked out my front door. I planned on going to look for my dad, and that's when I heard it. Screaming. I don't know if it was my dad's or if it was just a wild animal, but we called the police anyway. And as I type this, I can hear a faint clicking out by the woods, and if I look hard enough, I think I can make out a human face looking up at my window. Please, if you are ever in the forests of Oklahoma, be extra quiet. You never know who or what is going to hear you.